and the second largest segregated for Latinx students. 85% of our Black students, 75% of our Latinx students, intensely segregated schools. Meanwhile, only 14% of Black students, 18% of Latinx students attend high opportunity high schools, compared to 43% of white and Asian students. Even in District 3, one of Manhattan's most demographically diverse areas, we see segregation persist. One of the 16 schools with 35% or more Black students, the average white enrollment is just 4%. This segregation affects outcomes. In 2024, Black fourth grade students scored 31 points lower in reading than their white peers. Latinx students scored 38 points lower. Students from low-income households scored nearly 30 points below their wealthier classmates. And this is despite the fact that New York City spends an average of $31,717 per student, nearly double the national average. In 2017, New York City Public Schools launched a diversity plan aimed at reducing school segregation. It set goals to increase numbers of racial, reduce economically stratified school by 10%, and expand inclusive practices for English language learners, students with disabilities. It included 12 policy proposals and created a school diversity advisory group to provide citywide recommendations. Programs like diversity in admissions have expanded from 7 schools in 2016 to over 100 today, prioritizing students who are low-income English language learners and students in temporary housing. Yet, participation remained voluntary and impact has been limited in scales. Admission policies include academic screening and gifted and talented program access continue to reinforce disparities. The pandemic briefly interrupted these systems, leading to more equitable enrollment, but screens were reinstated in 2022. Now, based on fourth grade course grades, as of this year, 69 middle schools have returned to using academic screens. School choice and zoning policies also play a role. While families can technically apply citywide, in practice, language access issues, digital barriers, and complex application systems create real obstacles, especially for immigrant and low-income families. In 2019, the Council passed Local Law 225, requiring every community school district to develop a diversity plan through the establishment of district diversity working groups. 5 years later, New York City Public Schools has yet to fully implement the requirements citywide. Only a few districts have published plans. I am concerned by the lack of transparency and accountability. Research has shown that integrated schools produce stronger academic outcomes, increase civic engagement, and improve graduation rates. But progress requires more than good intentions. It requires structure, urgency, and sustained action. Today, we will hear from New York City Public Schools, students, families, educators, advocates, and we will ask, what are we doing, not in theory, but in practice, to create a public school system that truly reflects the diversity of our city and its values? And we will talk about advancing equity in our schools. We must also confront the disparities that exist in access to basic preventative care. This is why I'm proud to sponsor Reso 718, Equity Includes the Right to Learn Without Avoidable Pain or Shame. Thank you to the members of the Education Committee who have joined us today. Councilmember Williams, Lewis, Momorado, Hudson, Brewer, and Narcisse. I would also like to thank committee staff Nadia Jean-Francois, Chloe Rivera, Andrew Lane Lawless, Gray Amato, Rose Martinez, Eric Brown, Ann Driscoll, as well as my own staff, Giovanni Piquant and Joel Desouve, for their work today. I will now turn to my co-chair, Dr. Natasha Williams, for her opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Natasha Williams, and I serve as chair to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Thank you to everyone joining us for today's joint hearing with the Committee on Education. And of course, a big thank you to my co-chair, Councilmember Joseph, for working with me to address this topic. I'd like to start off by wishing everyone a happy Juneteenth tomorrow. Yes, I'm greatly honored to be in a position to help facilitate such important conversations on the eve of such an important day. New York City did not gain its reputation as the melting pot of the United States by accident. Our city's identity is largely built on its role as a haven of opportunity for the people who come from all over the world to build a better life, a fundamental aspect of which is access to quality education. There are currently over 900,000 students enrolled in the city's public school system. These are the students who will grow up to be the future of our city and our country. A driving force behind what makes this city great is the effort, attention, and dedication of our parents and our educators who work tirelessly every day to foster and shape the next generation of New Yorkers. Racial and income disparities have persisted as obstacles in academic achievement for far too long. As Chair Joseph pointed out in her opening statement, the vast majority of Black and Hispanic students attend segregated schools. Yet, even in instances where Black and Hispanic students attend quote-unquote high opportunity schools, they are less likely to enroll in advanced coursework compared to their white and Asian peers. While policymakers are committed to ensuring that New York City Public Schools has the resources to tackle these persistent problems, a commitment that is constantly and consistently reflected in the budget. During today's hearing, I'm hoping to learn more about the work that the department has done to ensure that all children have equitable access to the educational resources and tools that will set them up for success both within our school system and beyond. I also welcome what I hope will be constructive conversation surrounding the bills and resolutions being heard today. Thank you to committee staff and the data team for their work on this hearing, and thank you to my colleagues who have also joined us today. I look forward to hearing everyone's testimony.
Thank you, Chair Williams. I would also like to recognize Councilmember Krishnan, Councilmember Lee, and Councilmember Brooke Powers. I now thank you, Chair Williams. Before we swear in the administration, we will also hear remarks from Councilmember Brooks Powers.
Thank you, chairs, and thank you to my colleagues who've joined us for this important conversation. I'm proud to sponsor Intro 142, which would require the Department of Education to conduct a biannual study on student access to home internet and devices. This is a matter of educational equity, and we can't close the achievement gap without first closing the digital divide. We saw during the pandemic just how deeply this issue affects students in communities like mine. I represent parts of Southeast Queens where too many households still struggle with reliable broadband or lack the necessary devices for their children to fully participate in school, especially in multi-child homes. If a student doesn't have access to the internet, they're not just missing homework, they're missing tutoring, research, test prep, and college applications. They're missing the foundations for long-term success. As chair of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I often focus on how we move New Yorkers safely and efficiently. But digital infrastructure is just as essential in today's world. It's a matter of access, it's a matter of opportunity, and it's a matter of fairness. This bill is simple. It ensures that we're not guessing, we're gathering real data to understand where gaps persist, and it requires DOE to propose meaningful solutions, not just document the problem. I urge the department to support this legislation, and I thank the chairs for holding today's hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Now I'd like to turn to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much. I am discussing Intro 929. It's called the Protect Our Schools Act. And in today's world, unfortunately, we have to think about these issues. It would protect and ensure that students, faculty, and staff are protected from civil immigration arrest while attending school or participating in school-related activities, and it would establish clear guidelines on law enforcement access to school property. I want to thank the Chancellor because she has been at every rally discussing this topic, supportive of the students and faculty and parents. And I haven't heard about ICE showing up at a school so far, but I know in one school in particular, we're all very accustomed and nervous when we see people in unmarked cars looking like they are from ICE. We don't know, but we did see some outside of a school recently, not in a school. Anything is possible in this environment. The federal government is making arrests inside immigration courts for no apparent reason, as we saw more dramatically than ever yesterday. The Protect Our Schools Act did not pass either house in Washington. It is important legislation giving escalating threats out of Washington, D.C. and our federal government. A similar bill did pass, the Protect Our Courts Act, which prohibits immigration-related arrests inside a New York State courthouse. The Department of Justice promptly sued to block it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer. Councilmember Morado.
Thank you, Chair Joseph and members of the committee, and to all those that are here to offer testimony. Thank you for your time and attention on this legislation. Intro 1002, a local law to require all schools to stock airway clearance devices, is rooted in a fundamental responsibility protecting the lives of our children. This effort is deeply personal. I had lost my grandfather due to a choking incident that could not be reversed in time, and it happened fast. The sad part is knowing that if a simple tool was made available, it may have saved his life. That experience showed me how critical it is to have more than one way to respond to an emergency. This legislation does not replace CPR or the Heimlich maneuver. They're always going to be the first line of defense. But when those fail, we need a backup, we need a plan B. Just like we prepare for fire drills, we install defibrillators, it's about readiness. It's about avoiding the painful question of what if we had something better prepared or put in place. This hearing is a chance to surface every question, concern, and idea so we can move forward thoughtfully. We welcome input from educators, medical professionals, first responders, and families to ensure that this law is safe, effective, and realistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'd like to also acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Jenowitz. Finally, I would like to remind everyone who wishes to testify in person today that you must fill out a witness slip, which you can find on the desk of the Sergeant at Arms near the entrance of this room. Please fill out the slip, even if you're already registered in advance, that you'll be testifying in person today. If you wish to testify on the Intro 142-955-1002 or Resolution 718 or 929, please indicate on the slip whether you're here to testify in favor or in opposition to the legislation. I also want to point out that we will not be voting on any legislations today to allow as many people as possible to testify. Testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person, whether you're testifying in person or in Zoom. I'm also going to ask my colleagues to limit their questions and comments to 5 minutes. Please note that witnesses who are here in person will testify before those who are signed into Zoom webinar. I will now turn it over to Education Committee Counsel to administer the oath.
Good afternoon. Now, in accordance with the rules of the council, I will administer the affirmation to the witnesses from the mayoral administration. I will call on each of you individually for a response. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before these committees and to respond honestly to council member questions? Dan Weisberg.
I do.
Chancellor Aviles Ramos.
I do.
Travonda Kelly.
I do.
Yael Calbon.
I do.
And for those here for Q&A, if you can raise your right hand as well. John Hammer. Corrine Apollon. Robin Daveson. TC Cristina Melendez. Dr. Mia Teresa Date. Brenda Garcia. Kleber Palma. Kevin Moran. Superintendent Megan Dunn. Is that everybody? Thank you so much. You may begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair Joseph, Chair Williams, and all the members of the Education and Civil and Human Rights Committees here today. Thank you for inviting me to testify about the diversity of New York City Public Schools, the largest school district in the nation. I am Melissa Aviles Ramos, Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, and I am joined by First Deputy Chancellor Daniel Weisberg, Chief Enrollment Officer Travonda Kelly, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of District Planning Yael Calbon, and other New York City Public Schools colleagues. I appreciate and share your commitment to this critically important topic, which feels especially meaningful to discuss the day before Juneteenth. The values of equity and diversity are deeply personal for me. as a woman, a Latina, a lifelong educator, and the mother of a New York City public school student. As you may know, my own mother sent me to Catholic school because our local public school back in the 1980s did not provide the excellent and equitable education that she knew I deserved. And I have been working tirelessly ever since to ensure that families across our city, from the Bronx to Brooklyn to Southeast Queens, have equitable opportunities within our public education system. As a teacher, principal, district leader, and now as chancellor, I put equity at the forefront of my practice. I believe that diverse schools are an important goal. All students and backgrounds. In New York City, diversity is one of our greatest strengths, and our diversity is rooted in all aspects of students' and employees' identities, including cultural, racial, gender, ethnic, and religious diversity, to name a few. For context, in 2023-24, there were 912,000 students, over 912,000 students in New York City public schools of many races and ethnicities. That breakdown was 42.2% Latine, 19.5% Black, 18.7% Asian, 16.2% white, 1.8% multiracial, and 1.2% Native American. Additionally, 73.5% of our students in the 23-24 school year were economically disadvantaged. 21.6% were students with disabilities, and 16.3% were English language learners. Our families, moreover, communicate in over 180 languages. These numbers, when taken in aggregate, capture a richly diverse school system. For example, approximately half of our schools do not have a 60% plus majority of one race or ethnicity, and only 1 in 5 schools has a single racial group making up 75% of student enrollment. At the same time, I acknowledge that not all our schools reflect the full diversity of our city. In large part, this is due to demographic realities, most of which have been outside of our control. These include entrenched housing patterns, families' decisions around where to reside within New York City and where to enroll their children. And our enrollment processes are largely driven by family choice. Families moving outside the city in the wake of the pandemic, as reported in the New York Times in 2023 and 2024, families registering their students in private, parochial, or charter schools, and more. Additionally, consistent with Supreme Court precedent, New York City public schools does not use race as a factor in school admissions. As mentioned, New York City public schools admission processes have been historically guided by family choice, and while we cannot control families' geographic or educational preferences, we can uplift and support communities that are eager for increased diversity in their schools. To that end, there are numerous local diversity initiatives that we have encouraged or helped facilitate. For instance, we operate diversity and admissions initiatives in over 100 schools, which are calibrated to create greater access for groups that are underrepresented in those schools, such as low-income students, students in temporary housing, English language learners, and more. Each DIA initiative is driven by community efforts like those in Districts 1, 3, 13, and 15, and/or school leadership teams. Further, we set aside seats for students with disabilities at every middle and high school to ensure representation and access for these students and to ensure compliance with the law. This September, we will open our 3rd new accelerated high school. These schools will together serve upwards of 1,500 students at scale, with admissions priorities that promote greater representation of students from across neighborhoods and demographic groups while still ensuring access for local families. We have also successfully increased diversity at some of our highest demand schools by relocating them to buildings where they can grow or merge with other schools serving different demographics, creating more diverse schools that are accessible to even more students. These schools, including PS 150 in District 2 and East Village Community School in District 1, enroll students through our diversity and admissions program and have grown significantly since these changes, with substantial increases in their percentages of students living in poverty, even doubling at PS 150. Additionally, we have worked hand in hand with community education councils to center diversity and integration in our rezoning work. We aim to simultaneously tackle overcrowding and integration by drawing new school zones that are appropriately sized and geographically manageable for families, and that increase the diversity of these zones wherever possible. I want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the excellent integration initiatives that have been driven by communities such as District 15, 13, and 3, whose superintendents are here today to further speak to this work. Implemented in 2018, the community-driven District 15 diversity plan focused on middle schools across the district, an area that includes Boerum Hill, Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Fort Greene, Park Slope, Sunset Park, Red Hook, and Windsor Terrace. This plan prioritized admissions for underserved groups and supported equity-focused programming. I'm proud to say that the district has made notable gains in building inclusive school cultures, ensuring individual schools better reflect the demographics of the district, and uplifting community voice in decision-making. Similarly, in Districts 13 and 3, community members and leaders have worked together to implement district-wide diversity plans and intentional school mergers. For example, the merger of the Academy of Arts and Letters and PS 305 in Brooklyn a few years ago has allowed for diverse classes along with purposeful and thoughtful opportunities for peer-to-peer relationship building, including via advisory, electives, after-school programming, and more. We've also seen success with the merger of Lafayette Academy and Westside Collaborative in Manhattan. I'd like to thank the superintendents here today for their leadership and for empowering their families as we work to uplift and encourage more diverse school communities. I want to close by zooming out for a moment to look at equity and opportunity with a broader lens. School integration is often portrayed in the media in black and white terms, literally. But that one-dimensional portrayal simply doesn't reflect the demographics of our city in 2025. And with it comes an inaccurate and dangerous implication that if we just put students of color in desks next to white students, then achievement will automatically rise. I reject that premise entirely. So while of course we should uplift diversity in all its forms, I believe increasing equity goes far beyond simply moving students' enrollments. What families tell us matters most to them and what will guarantee we deliver an equitable education to all students is ensuring that every one of our schools, no matter the demographics or zip code, provides an academically rigorous, world-class education. That's why we are going full speed on expanding the pie, increasing educational access and opportunity by growing the number of high-quality options available, especially in historically marginalized communities of color. We are providing families with a multitude of choices, from neighborhood schools to schools with specific focus areas, from dual language programs to specialized programs for students with disabilities, from early college programs to CETE schools, and much more, so that families can select the setting and program that best fits their child. That's why we have added 103 bilingual programs and 1,400 specialized autism program seats since 2022. Why we brought Bard Early College High School to the South Bronx and East New York, and why we are about to open the first early college high school to partner with an HBCU in Southeast Queens. It's why we have created 2 dyslexia-focused elementary schools and innovative high school programs like Northwell School of Sciences. And when it comes to our strategic priorities and initiatives more broadly, equity is still at the center. We are working hard every day to address long-standing and unacceptable educational disparities. First and foremost, we are ensuring our children, especially low-income students of color, become strong readers and mathematicians, doubling down on research-based instruction and high-quality curricula through New York City Reads and Solves. Students and launched innovative family empowerment efforts like New York City Public Schools Cares. We have updated our Fair Student Funding Formula, one of the most equitable school funding formulas in the nation. We are hiring an increasingly diverse workforce. 48% of our teachers and 55% of our principals are people of color. We are working hard to ensure students across all neighborhoods are safe and supported, and we are relentlessly pushing for improved academic outcomes. I want to be clear. Where we do see separation of students of differing backgrounds in otherwise diverse neighborhoods, we want to explore where and how we can break down barriers in partnership with community stakeholders. As I previously shared, we are eager to empower schools and districts to determine what works best for their communities. I'm proud of all we've done to advance equity, access, and opportunity in New York City public schools, especially at this moment in time. But I'm also eager to do more. I know the work is far from finished. Thank you for your continued partnership and for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions on the topic.
And the legislation part.
Thought you might be tired of hearing me talk. And finally, I'd like to turn to the legislation also being considered today. Intro 142 would require New York City Public Schools to conduct a study on student access to home internet. New York City Public Schools currently provides resources to families on both devices and broadband plans on our website. We believe students should have access to internet-enabled devices, and we are happy to work with our partners to close technological gaps. However, we don't believe that a biannual survey is the best way to ascertain data points on internet access. Every school is responsible for providing devices to students who need them, and we are working with the New York City Office of Technology and Innovation on an outreach campaign to inform students and families of discount broadband options this fall. Intro 955 calls for annual reporting on after-school programs. We are excited by the Mayor's commitment to after-school programming and look forward to working collaboratively with our Department of Youth and Community Development colleagues to ensure thoughtful allocation of these additional seats. Finally, Intro 1002 addresses the stocking of airway clearance devices. Abdominal thrust, also known as the Heimlich maneuver, is still the recommended first aid technique to be used in case of choking in children, and our health experts recommend its usage. We appreciate the Council's interest in the health of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Ramos. I'm going to pass it over to Chair Williams. She gets the honor today.
Oh, gosh. Thank you, Chair. Really excited to learn more about Districts 15, 13, and 3. But I was just listening to this podcast that an amazing educator that works for New York City Public Schools told me about. And it was actually about this exact topic in District 28 in Queens. So just wondering if you can share some insight on what happened there, because from what I've listened to in the podcast, things kind of went left.
I apologize, Chair, but I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, District 28 was supposed to be another one of those schools that got a grant for the diversity initiatives, but there was a ton of community pushback, and I think it's now 2-3 superintendents removed. I know Dr. Pate did a pretty good job before she left to go to your central office, but yes, just wanted to know, because I know you have examples of what has happened by way of District 15, 13, and 3, but just wanted to know if you had some insight on status and what happened in D28 in Queens.
So, Chair, if I may, would love it if we could set up a briefing to give you a background on D28.
Okay, no problem. And I just wanted to make a note that I think it's so wonderful that you mentioned the Bronx Steam Center, and I look forward to bringing a Queens Steam Center, and I just look forward to having one in each borough by way of what the mayor has said that he wanted to do. The mayor has stated multiple times that he wants a steam center in each borough. So the next question I have is, how is New York City Public Schools working in tandem with City Hall to protect all students, given the recent escalation by federal authorities in detaining minors across the country, with 2 being detained in New York City?
Thank you for the question, and I think the council knows that this is something very near and dear to my heart, having led Project Open Arms at the start of my career at Central. So it is a very privileged seat that I sit in, given how important this is to be chancellor during this time. I want to continue to reiterate that we have been very clear that non-local law enforcement officers cannot enter our building without judicial warrants. As such, we have trained parent coordinators, safety agents in collaboration with NYPD. We have trained principals. We have trained teachers. We've done Know Your Rights training for families. We continue to do Know Their Rights trainings. We also are having community conversations. One kicked off in the Bronx, and we are planning to do one in Brooklyn. These are the start of many conversations where we're talking about how to better partner with community-based organizations and people who have social and political capital in the communities who can escalate matters to us. That's not only reserved for immigration, that's also when we talk about the safety of our young people and things like gang and gun violence. To the current situation with ICE, our policies remain in place. The training will continue. Whenever we receive escalations about ICE in or around a particular school, I personally work with the team to investigate those and to see if there's actually a number of things, all the things that we have always done, and we're not going to stop doing those things.
Thank you. Given that equitable funding is critical to addressing segregation, how is New York City Public Schools ensuring that foundation aid that you referenced is being allocated in a way that directly supports school integration efforts, particularly in historically underfunded schools with high populations of English language learners and students from marginalized communities?
Well, we're certainly disappointed that the suggested weights that we made for foundation aid weren't fully accepted. So I think just putting forth the formula, that the one that we put forth shows our commitment to our core values. And I am going to ask our First Deputy Chancellor to please provide further detail.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and for the question. It's critically important. We know it's not the only resource that matters, but school funding matters tremendously. It's something that's on our mind all the time. We're fortunate, as the Chancellor mentioned in her testimony, that our fair student funding formula, by which most of the funds that go to our schools is distributed largely based on student need. And there was a study a couple of years ago by some academics at Georgetown which found that our method of school funding was the top 2 most equitable in the country. So it doesn't mean we can't do more, but we have a decent starting point. And then we're proud that we were able to add an additional weight for students in temporary housing, which, as you all are keenly aware, is a very large population in New York City schools, as well as for schools that serve a concentration of students with additional needs. So that added to about $100 million. In addition, it was increasing the pie, directed and targeted, council member, specifically at the schools serving those populations. So there are other funding streams, as you're aware, like Title I, that are also directed to schools and to students who come from low-income households. As the Chancellor mentioned, it would be a huge boost to our ability to provide school funding equitably if the state were to adjust its formula, for example, to account more clearly for the needs of our students with disabilities. If they were to add a weight for students in temporary housing, and then frankly for our ability to fund these initiatives overall, if they were to take account of the regional cost that exists here in New York City. So we have some things to be proud of, and our students are benefiting from that. Some of the programs you'll hear about today are only because we're able to direct those funds to where the student need is, but there's much more we could be doing.
First Deputy Chancellor, just want to follow up real quick. Is there a possibility to bring back the working group that we had for SFS, since we did not get the foundation aid that we did require, that we did ask? And some of it is, as we know, are tied with restrictions. So I think we should revisit that possibility of, the group meeting again and really looking at it. As we said, this was a work in progress. It wasn't a done deal.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Available to schools to utilize to further diversity initiatives. For example, schools that wish to implement school-wide enrichment models instead of G&T programs are two vastly demographically different schools that may be merging. Are they given resources, funding to facilitate community discussions before, throughout, and directly after the process?
So because diversity and equity is at the core of everything that we do, we look at the funding that we provide from the program offices as part of everything. So again, when we provide funding to schools to support with Future Ready NYC, that is not an initiative that is reserved for more affluent and higher performing students. We are very strategic and make sure that it is going into marginalized communities with minoritized children. And so we are happy to talk about all of these initiatives and programs, but one of the other things that we do, and I know our First Deputy Chancellor is going to talk more about this, is work strategically with the superintendent to identify where are the areas of concern when it comes to diversity and equity in a specific district, and then activate This is one of the reasons why we are seeing the HBCU school in the community that it's going to sit in. It is one of the reasons why when the Bronx stood up and said we want a STEAM center and they had the location for it, we were able to move forward with it. These are things that are in response to the community, but they reflect our core values around diversity and equity. First Deputy Chancellor.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor. And Chair, so we try not to put too many restrictions on the funds that we give to schools. So I just want to directly answer your question. So one of the positive things about fair student funding is it is not restricted. We don't say that it has to go towards, for example, school-wide enrichment models. But if that is what a school wants to pursue, that funding is there. In general, the hold harmless money that we just put out, I think it was $128 million. That's not restricted funds. Some of the funds that come from the state and the feds, as Chair Joseph says, are restricted. So to directly answer your question, do we have a restricted funding stream for those particular purposes? Generally not. There are some grants that go to those things. But what we always tried to do, and I think this is one of the areas where we've seen real progress, is provide robust funding to our schools, and then have the superintendents, and you'll hear from some of them in a moment, put their ear to the ground with the principals. If what they're hearing from families, from students is, we want a school-wide enrichment model at this school, then what we expect of them is they're going to raise that up and say, we're doing this, we need assistance, technical assistance, we need funding, and then our job under the Chancellor's leadership is to try to support them in doing that, rather than us sitting back here and saying, we're putting out this restricted funding and hope that you all are going to find it to be helpful.
I do want to add something to that. That also works as a mechanism to protect our children, because what we don't want is to just give funding streams that are so flexible and not have oversight when a district is in need of certain things. And so that's why I have charged the superintendents to make sure that they or a representative from their team is present on every principal's budget meeting, because I want to make sure that these dollars that we have given to the schools, which, if I may be frank, had I known that we were going to give this much money to schools, I would have stayed a principal and I wouldn't be the chancellor. But we want to make sure that schools are making well on the promise to children and using those budgets. So to give you a pointed example, if a school doesn't have a library, which as I see it, that is an equity issue. If you do not have a library and you do not have a librarian, that's a problem. Now, if you have stretched your dollars beyond spandex and you still can't afford a librarian, and we are certainly going to step in and support. But what's not going to happen is that we are going to comfort the center of adults and hire, tons of administrators or people who are going to make things comfortable for other adults and not center the equity focus of this administration. So please know that flexibility allows for schools to reflect our core values around equity and diversity, but we also step in, and where we see an issue, we advise.
Yes, I actually have a few schools that don't have a library. The library is like a storage unit, so I would love to touch bases with you on that, because they don't have a library, therefore they don't have a library.
You should.
Yes. It's a few of my schools,
That
actually.
would be great.
Okay, I'll ask a few more questions, and then I'll maybe come back. So what is the current demographic breakdown of the New York City Public Schools teacher workforce? And as the system prepares to hire thousands of new teachers to comply with the class size mandate, how is New York City Public Schools ensuring that this hiring also advances a workforce that reflects the diversity of the students it serves? And I know certain areas, the demographic looks a little different.
Yep.
Queens.
I work with our superintendents, and what I will say is that we recognize that diversity in our teaching profession has been a challenge for many, many years. And so it's not just about filling 3,700 additional seats, especially now as we work to comply with class size law. So we don't want just 3,700 teachers who are not reflecting the needs of our children. And so we're being super intentional about how we partner with New York teacher pipeline, in making sure that we have people who are invested in our communities to stand in those communities. That's not only for our teachers, that's also for our social workers. So one of the things that Chief Mark Rampersant has been really intentional about is working with universities to identify social work interns who can actually work in communities that they understand and that they have an investment in. First Deputy Chancellor, if you can go into the breakdown.
Sure thing, Chancellor. So the current breakdown for teachers is 52% white, 16% black or African American, 19% Hispanic, 8% Asian, and less than 1% of other demographics. Principals, by the way, I don't know if specifically, Chair, you asked about principals, but 45% are white, 30% are black or African American, 19% Hispanic, and 5% Asian. And just to put a little bit of context on that, that makes us, New York City, the most diverse educator workforce in New York State among any of the large districts. And I'll just put that out there, not to say that, as the Chancellor says, we don't have a long way to go to make sure that we are hiring equitably across all groups and making sure that our kids are seeing tremendous diversity in their educator and other workforce. This is in a country where about 80% of the teachers are white nationwide. And we're about now, a majority of our students nationwide are now identify as students of color. So, and just to say on what we're doing, right, we're about to do a big hiring push for purposes of lowering class size. One of the best tools we have on diversity, which we're really trying to lean on, is alternative certification. Our teaching fellows, many of you know about teaching fellows. We are very fortunate to have a chancellor who came to New York City Public Schools through the Teaching Fellows Program. That gets us both shortage area teachers, a good supply of shortage area teachers for disciplines like special education and ENL, but also our most diverse pipeline. And so we have doubled the size of our incoming Teaching Fellows class. Just final comment, Chair Joseph has heard me say this before, one of the main barriers, we did a survey of our paraprofessionals who should be an amazing pipeline for our teacher workforce and a huge boost to diversity as well. It's a pretty small number of paraprofessionals who get their teaching license every year, and we surveyed them because we want to increase that and asked them about obstacles. You know, first of all, asked them about interest, and as you can imagine, overwhelming majority said they had an interest in becoming teachers, and we asked them, what are the obstacles? The number one obstacle was cost. And so one of the reasons our alternative certification Teaching Fellows program is successful is we subsidize tuition. That takes money. We have to find a budget for that. We need help from you all and others in order to do that, but it's extremely effective at broadening the talent pipeline that comes into New York City teaching profession.
Wanted to do a quick follow-up on your teacher recruitment, but there's also a study that says that most of the teachers that are newly hired are also in low-income neighborhoods. How do we look at that? And that's the reality, right? When we really talk about outcome and how do we really serve our most vulnerable New Yorkers, is making sure the talent is also in low-income neighborhoods, and how do we support that?
Well, a couple of things. One is that we have been really focused on retention just as much as recruitment. And that's why with New York City Reads and Solves, it was important that we have the coaching mechanism in place to support those teachers. Because what we didn't want is for the curriculum to decorate the shelves like in the past, where we would get books and materials. Chair Joseph, I know you know what I'm talking about. We probably had a shelf with about 5 or 6 different editions from year over year. We didn't want that to happen, and so we knew that something different had to happen, and that difference is in the coaching. So having shoulder-to-shoulder, job-embedded support, not getting feedback just on a 15-minute snapshot, but someone who was telling you in real time how you can adjust your practice. That allows for and ensures teacher retention, because teachers aren't trying to figure it out on the ground. The second part of it is the most important component, which is making sure that we're giving them sure you did too, because I did too. We were writing our own curriculum. It was advertised as teacher autonomy, but it was not teacher autonomy. It was us flying while we were building, and that is unacceptable. And actually, the union, CBA, tells us we need to make sure that we are providing curriculum, which we have not done across the system. So that is also contributing to teacher retention. The other piece of it is making sure that we are celebrating the adults and creating pipelines for leadership. And I don't just mean going from teacher to assistant principal and principal. There are people who want to stay teachers forever. How do we honor that role? We have master model teacher opportunities. We're collaborating with the UFT so we can have those successful teacher centers. These are all things. And then finally, in terms of the specific communities, we offer early hiring commitment opportunities. So that way people can go out, principals can go out and they can seek their talent and they can position themselves early on, incentivizing hires in these communities. But as you stated in your question, it's not a problem to get them in, it's a problem to keep them there. And I truly believe that the coaching and the support that we're giving our teachers now with New York City Reads is going to really work in our favor.
So just a follow-up to that, question around culturally responsive curricula or programming, if any, are currently in place to support and implement the CRSC framework across schools. I know there's like a ton of books. I feel like, I don't remember the title, somebody told me a title about like, white teachers in black communities. I think there's like lots of resources. And when I saw this, I thought of these resources and thinking about how that is getting implemented, considering that while there is diversity, culturally responsive professional development, I think is so important.
It's very important. And the work of Chris Emden and Dr. Goldie Muhammad, it all continues to live very much in our schools. One of the things that I'm super proud of is that we took a lot of people from our teaching and learning team, which was at Central, and we redeployed them into district teams. That was key because now that gives extra experts in the teaching and learning field to be able to work directly with districts and go into schools. Our DEI team is still alive and strong under the leadership of our Chief Diversity Officer, Karina Pollan, and we also have Jonathan Foy, who started that work in previous administrations and continues to lead that work. So our DEI coaches are still very much providing professional learning, and not only are they providing professional learning, but they're working, again, shoulder to shoulder with superintendents. I also want to bring up our meeting the moment work, because when we talk about CRSE, it goes beyond what we have talked about historically. When we think about the uptick in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, the meeting the moment work has been incredibly important, and it all goes back to education. And so the training that we do with Facing History is also part of our DEI work, because we know that when young people understand differences in race and culture and ethnicity and linguistic diversity, but still see the through line across all the different communities, they do coexist in a very meaningful way. And so this work continues. It will continue despite everything that's happening. We don't shy away from that work. I also just made my 8-month anniversary, if you will, and it's been a busy year. So we're excited to close out this school year and bring together groups. I have my student advisory council, my superintendent and principal advisory council, starting a teacher advisory council. We have an amazing parent advisory council. And this is a topic that is perfect for our subcommittees to really tackle, so we can have engagement across stakeholder groups to inform us on how we can further this work in the upcoming school year.
Thank you, Chair Williams. My question is, what is New York City Public Schools currently doing to increase the number of inclusive schools to serve emergent multilanguage learners and students with disabilities? In this conversation, they are so important.
And as you can see, John Hammer is very eager to sit in the seat and tell you all about this work. You don't even have to hear me talk, Chair.
No, he's right there. It's all his. Take it away.
Thank you, Chancellor. And I just wanted to thank you, Chair Joseph, for the opportunity to share our efforts to fully include students with disabilities and English language learners in all of our school communities. I'm just honored to work for an organization that truly believes that disability and multilingualism are aspects of diversity that strengthen our school culture and help shape our future leaders. I just also have to say, personally, it is absolutely inspirational to work for a chancellor who is a warrior for this work each and every day, keeps our entire division inspired to do this work on behalf of her. We are proud to offer 566 bilingual education programs in 12 languages. This year we opened our first ASL dual language program in District 2 at the 47 school in District 2. And since 2022, we have opened over 100 new bilingual education programs, as the Chancellor testified earlier. Turning specifically to special education, not only are our schools expected to welcome and serve students with disabilities, but schools are expected to meaningfully include those students with disabilities in a general education classroom to the greatest extent appropriate for every student. I'm proud to share that 2 out of every 3 of our students with IEPs spends the majority of their school day in classrooms that are inclusive without students, and includes students without IEPs. One of the areas that we're currently focusing this work is around including students with greater needs, students that are traditionally recommended to receive services in District 75 settings. For context on District 75, 91% of students come from low-income families, 75% are Black and Hispanic. Broadly, we are working to disrupt a system where families that have resources attend private schools via Carter cases, while low-income students of color are served in District 75 far from their homes. Mm-hmm. Now, our District 75 schools, they are doing phenomenal work. I'm so proud of our principals, our teachers. But the truth is that many families, they want access to services, high-quality therapy, high-quality instruction. They want that in their local community school so that their children can learn alongside their siblings and their neighbors. We believe in a system where no child should need to leave their community to receive those therapies and those services. So how do we do that, right? That's the big question. And it's our belief that the programs we offer, NEST, AIMS, Horizon, for example, we believe these programs are highly competitive to any non-public school program that is out there. And our families largely agree. We have over 2,400 applicants for NEST and Horizon, over 350 for our AIMS program. And we're working to expand these programs in historically underserved communities. This will allow us to ensure the equity in the special education process. This fall, as I've testified earlier this year, we expanded specialized autism programs in Districts 5, 12, and 14. We said any incoming kindergarten student that could benefit from NEST, Horizon, and AIMS would be offered a seat in these programs. And as a result, we've been able to keep students closer to home. D75 referrals have reduced from 56% to 19%. Average distance between home and school reduced from 2.7 miles to 1.5 miles. 93% of students that were placed in these programs through this pilot were Black and Hispanic. Next year, we're going to continue to expand specialized programs. We're seeking to provide the highest quality services to students in their local communities. Not only are these programs desired by families, they deliver strong results. NEST and Horizon boast a 97% graduation rate, and they have the power to change the entire school community. I'm excited that we have Superintendent Alvarez here today. District 15 has some shining examples of specialized programs, one of those being 15K 958 and 15K 015. I'm just going to give Superintendent Alvarez an opportunity to speak about some of the great work happening in this.
Thank you for that question on D75, but our students who are part of the D75 community still face accessibility to buildings. So that's going to be something when we talk about equity and segregation, that's going to be something we need to address. Our schools are not accessible and our students are normally left behind and having to travel so far because their schools are not accessible. And even not parents cannot attend their shows or if the buildings are not accessible. So when we talk about equity and segregation, that also plays a huge role in having access to education that's nearby. And our D75 students also face barriers when navigating admissions process. So we have to talk about that, not only to schools, but also to school-based programming. When we talk about after school, so our students in D75 cannot attend summarizing till the end of the day. Why? Because there's no transportation for them. So those are also areas we have to address and concerns with families navigating admissions process to middle school and high school. Talk to me about that.
I appreciate all of those points, Chair Joseph, and we know that there is funding for accessibility in the capital plan. We appreciate the council.
It's not enough.
We appreciate the council.
We asked for $1.1 billion. It's only $800 million. And the goal, so that sets our goal for making schools accessible for our students with disability. We set it back.
Yeah, we appreciate your advocacy on that front and know that we need to do this work as quickly as possible for our students and families. District 75 has traditionally operated its own after-school program, which actually runs in every District 75 school, is operating some sort of an after-school program through a separate allocation.
Till what time? So
It
let's
likely
say my
depends-
kid wants to attend a summer rising program, they cannot. Those are the realities, right? We know it exists, but how can we make it better? That's going to be our next step and how we continue to work and our conversations together. We're here to work together.
Yes.
Right? So we know it exists because I can find a bunch of kids. You know me, I'm good for that. I'll find a bunch of kids that will come here and say, yeah, I have to go home at the regular time, 4 o'clock, because I can't stay any longer because there's no transportation to take me home.
We completely acknowledge that we have work to do, and we feel completely grateful for your partnership in getting it done.
Talk to me about admissions for our D75 students. How do we help them navigate that middle school and high school?
Hi, Chair Joseph.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your question. We do have a special team that works with our families who need support. And so we provide the one-on-one support that they need to provide them with the information. We also are lucky to have a District 75 team dedicated to supporting families with placement. So we are providing support to families in many different ways. I know especially those who are interested in screen programs, we do provide support to those families as well. And that's also including making sure that they are aware that these seats exist. And so that information is in my schools. And so I'm not sure if there's one specific thing that you want to talk about more, but there are a lot of supports that we are providing to families. Of course, there are ways that we can improve, but our goal is to make sure that we are providing even at our family welcome centers and other call center, we are always making sure that we are specifically trying to support families who need the support the most. So I'm happy to dig in deeper if that's something that you want to talk about.
Thank you. Especially our parents who English is not their first language. What type of support are we providing? Students that does not have access to digital devices. A phone is not enough. How do we sit down when language is not the first, when English is not the first language? And how do we support those families in navigating those spaces? And I always tell about the student that live in my district that got into one of those top-notch schools. But my student has to travel 2.5 hours each way to get to that school every single day, and she's late in not getting her services. So it's a great thing. We're celebrating, we're making sure our D75 students or students with IEPs are getting into their specialized schools, but they can't spend 2.5 hours on a bus going and coming back. She gets on the bus every day at 6:30 in the morning. She doesn't get to school until 8:20, 8:30 every single day. For me, that's unacceptable. What kind of message we send to that young person? I always tell her, hate the bus, don't hate the school.
To that point, when it comes to transportation, of course, we and my colleague John spoke about adding the additional programs, which one of the goals is to make sure that those families, those students can go to programs closer to home. I don't want to speak too much about that because that's in his wheelhouse. But what I would say to your other points about the services that we provide to families who don't speak English or English is not their first language, we provide a lot of information sessions just in terms of our admission process. We offer those sessions in multiple languages. We also have them translated so that interpretation services so the families can follow what's being said. All of our materials are communicated to families in all of the different languages that we support, so they also have access that way. If they were to reach out to one of our call centers, they will also have access to a translator. Our family welcome centers also provide support in languages. Either we have counselors who speak a variety of languages that mirrors their communities, or they will use our translation services as well. So we are trying and we are getting better at ways in which we can use these tools to make sure that we are giving families who don't speak English that one-on-one support where language and that communication is not strained because they don't speak English. And so we are trying to get better there, but we do provide a lot of services in the languages of our communities.
Wanted to talk quickly about our students in our D75 that are co-located in other buildings. Where are we improving the spaces that they are in? I've visited a couple. I'm not liking what I saw. I'm hoping, especially the ones that's supposed to have life skills in their building, I'm not seeing what I visited, and I'm not liking what I'm seeing. So I'm hoping to see some improvement on that aspect. If our goal is to make sure they go through our system and having the life skills they need to function as regular community members, we have to make sure they have all the tools in their toolbox.
We completely agree that that is an important component to educating our students with disabilities, especially in District 75. I'm sorry to hear that you've seen some examples of areas where we need to work on. I'll be sure to follow up with you following the hearing to get some specifics on those schools and to get some team members out there to pay them a visit. I would say that I have seen some tremendous examples of schools delivering life skills curriculum. Specifically, I was at 277Q, the Riverview School, not too long ago, where they've really outfitted their entire school community into learning labs, right, where we have areas where students can learn to go to the laundromat, for example. Students can learn, all sorts of, daily. And so that work is growing within the district, and we know that we have work to do.
Of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in really quickly because I received an email today from the CEC for District 28 about a resolution that touches on the topic that the chair raised. I hope you look at the resolution, it just came out, but the resolution essentially is calling for you all, hold on, let me make sure I have it right, is calling for an establishment of mandatory co-location agreements that are collaboratively developed with D75 administrators, parent leaders, and staff to ensure equitable access to shared facilities, schedules, and school-wide opportunities. Creating a standardized co-location framework, appointing a dedicated co-location liaison, providing mandatory inclusion and disability awareness training for all school-based staff, ensuring parity in school leadership structures, adult and remedy facilities, disparities in co-located schools to guarantee that D75 students have equal access, and then elevate the voices of D75 families and students in co-located settings by creating inclusive feedback mechanisms and requiring meaningful parent engagement across all school communities. So clearly it is an issue like on the grounds, and it just is very befitting that I got this email about this resolution specifically on D75 issues in
I hear you on that, and I would just say that everything that I heard in that resolution is absolutely our expectation for co-location and principals working together, and so obviously we will support the District 28 community in implementing that resolution and those recommendations. I just want to very quickly, as we bring up District 28, I've spoken a lot about specialized program expansion, right? But there is a piece of this work that we're very excited to expand upon, right? It's taking the best pieces of our autism programming, the training, right? Creating the inclusive learning conditions, strengthening communication between teachers and families, teaching social skills and behavior support, adapting instruction. It's taking all of those pieces that make our specialized programs, special, and it's how do we train full districts in implementing these strategies. And so this fall, we're going to be rolling out a new initiative. It's called Inclusion Innovators, where we're going to be partnering with superintendents that have really come forward and said, I want to identify a team member on my district team who's going to become an autism expert. I'm going to offer access to the special education office, the Office of Autism, to all of the schools in my district to provide this support over the course of the school year with coaching support. Proud to share that Superintendent Blake in District 28 has come forward as one of the superintendents that's going to be participating in this work. It'll also be happening in District 1, District 9, District 19, and District 22. And so we're going to have a lot of opportunity to work with District 28 in the upcoming school year, and just really grateful for Superintendent Blake's leadership.
I want to jump in really quickly on the co-location piece because it's not only specific to D75. And let me just lead with this. none of your questions are an I gotcha for us or something eye-opening. We completely own the pockets and places and spaces of improvement that are needed across the system. And I don't only say that as a chancellor, I say that as the mother of a public school student. And one of the challenges with co-locations is that sometimes you have multiple superintendents in one building. And so one of the things that we have started to do is make sure that we are speaking to all the superintendents in the building, because there was a time where maybe one superintendent would show up, but not all of them. Our expectation is that all the leaders, from the principals to the superintendents, are around the table. We also know that our space planning folks, they can go in and they can take a look at who's entitled to what in terms of footprint. But there is a nuance to this, and that involves programming. And so there are a number of schools in the city where lunch starts at 9:15 in the morning. I don't know about you, but if it's not coffee, I'm not doing anything at 9:15 in the morning, let alone lunch. And so that is unacceptable for our children, right? We have a lot of work to do. But I do want to bring something up, and I'm actually glad, Chair, that you mentioned this resolution from CEC 28, which I have not had the privilege of reading yet. Because
It's new. I just got it this morning.
the CECs need to be empowered, and this is why we have established this pilot under Dr. Melendez and Dr. Rux's leadership, where we are piloting best strategies to ensure that CECs and superintendents are working collaboratively so that these things can be escalated and addressed before it has to get to this point. So stay tuned. The last thing I'll say about that is I'm visiting SLTs myself. Why? School leadership teams are a very important part of all of this process, and we don't talk enough about them. And so that's something that Dr. Melendez and I, as we do our roadshow around the city, we are meeting with school leadership teams, first of all, to make sure that they're functioning. Second of all, to make sure that they are at the table to speak about space planning issues and equitable programming around shared spaces, particularly for our D75 students. And then how do we activate on a plan that is fair for all parties involved?
Thank you, Chancellor, and I do agree. We weren't trying to get you, we were just trying to connect the dots and see where the gaps are and where we could come in and get them. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Sanchez on Zoom and also Councilmember Hanif. Now I'd like to pass it along to Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you so much, chairs, and good afternoon, Chancellor and everyone. Chair Joseph addressed the need to implement practice over theory in her opening remarks, and School District 13 in my councilmanic district is doing exactly that. Just last week, I attended District 13's monthly anti-racist town hall, which was a celebration of the district's growing commitment to using restorative justice practices in schools to build strong communities and to mitigate harm and to heal when harm happens, which I think is a perfect example of the type of work we should be fostering in all of our public schools. I'm really proud of the work Superintendent Megan Dunn, who just joined the dais here, is doing, especially in a school district that's facing rapid gentrification. And I do want to say that the pivotal work started under the leadership of Superintendent Kamar Samuels, who's also here. I don't know, Superintendent Alvarez, was it? Is that okay? But you're in good company, obviously. So I trust that you're doing just as amazing work. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about the work public schools is doing to facilitate anti-racism principles in schools and to mitigate harm that may result as neighborhoods change. And while I recognize that creating a more equitable school system doesn't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all solution, I'm curious to know if there are any system-wide efforts to further the work of Districts 15, 13, and 3, which you referenced in your testimony. And then after, I have one other question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And yes, this is why our diversity, equity, and inclusion team is very, very important, and that specific training that works with our superintendents to craft a professional learning plan that is specific to their community needs. Some districts are more advanced in this work than others. And so it's at that point, it becomes a capacity building model, right? Making sure that the leaders, although their core values are reflected in some of their plans, they're building capacity in people from teachers to school aides to parent leaders that share those same core values. And so that's one model, right? But then there's some communities that the changing of the mindset needs a lot more intentional work. And so that's why our central team gets deployed into the superintendencies to work in concert with the superintendent, identify the needs, and then activate. The superintendents who are here with us today, this work is natural to them. I had the privilege of working with Superintendent Alvarez when we were in the Bronx. As a matter of fact, he mentored me. And so, we have amazing leaders, but what we know is that communities change. Communities are dynamic. And so those needs assessment and paying attention to the needs of the community and then responding with the appropriate professional learning and support for the community is important. So that's one piece. And then I'd really love for our superintendents to have an opportunity, which is going to shut me up, and then we'll get to hear directly from our great leaders.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, Council Member Hudson, and thank you so much to the chairs for having us here today. I really want to underscore what you said, Chair Joseph, about the importance of really thinking about what is the theory and what is the practice and how are we putting these two things together. One of the things that we were able to do in District 13, actually back when I was deputy superintendent and Kamara was superintendent, was we were able to get rid of screens in all of our middle schools so that every student has access to any middle school in District 13. That's the policy piece. The hearts and minds piece is we meet every month with all members of the District 13 community. We ground our work in the 5 R's for real integration. We make sure that we're supporting the entire community of 8,500 families in entering in with the same understanding that we're entering in at the leadership level. I think from the superintendent seat, as the chancellor also touched on, it's my responsibility, our responsibility, to look at the opportunities, programs that are being offered through Central and really seeing how does that fit into my local context? What are the things that my community needs, and how do I make sure that those fit into my vision as a superintendent? My district team has participated in the DEEP program as part of the space planning team, which is an opportunity for me to build their capacity, and when they're going out to schools and really thinking about how are we both marrying this idea of here's the policy, here's the intellectual piece, and here's what it looks like on the ground. Even the work of the Hidden Voices curriculum, the Black Studies curriculum, we're doing a lot of work then within the district saying, here are the resources and the supports that Central is providing to us. We need to actualize them. We were able to pilot the Black Studies curriculum in District 13. Over 50 of our teachers went to the Burke Conference at TC a couple of weeks ago, volunteer as an opportunity because that was the clerical day, but they volunteered to go, and that's a huge chance for them to say, I want to continue my professional learning because this is really important to me and really important to my community.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. Shout out to Councilmember Brewer as well as Councilmember Hudson, who I've worked with very, very closely. Following up on the piece about the Black Studies curriculum, yes, the District 3 teachers presented at that conference, because it's important to recognize that this is not just about putting bodies in the same school or in the same classes. This is about making sure that when that happens, folks have the tools that are necessary to really ensure that all students are achieving at very high levels. And so what we've done is, through our work with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging team that the Chancellor mentioned earlier, is that we have also now trained ourselves in courageous conversations at the district level. So all of my team is trained in courageous conversations at the practitioner level, and I'm being trained at the facilitator level, so that when we go to communities, we are having real conversation, and we can make sure that in a polarized society, folks don't go to either end and the conversation stops. It's going to be important that we keep communities engaged throughout this entire process. We did that this year in Harlem with our Harlem Working Group, and we came to a very robust proposal that actually addresses every single piece that you've talked about before. We moved we recited a District 75 program to a more accessible building. We simultaneously recited one of our strongest middle schools to expand it to being an IB high school. We also worked with the community to ensure that we are on the pathway to sustainable elementary schools through that process. So this is not just a situation where we're saying, okay, let's rezone. And we also, as a part of that, had a rezoning, right? So all of the levers that we're continuing to talk about, they don't work in isolation. they work together. CRSC programs work together when you actually get students in the diverse students in the right space. And then teachers have to be trained, not just teachers, but we are not, as a society, really ready for some of the conversations. And so the good news is there have been no time before where there's so many tools to actually help us to have those conversations. We focus on the polarization, but we should also focus on there are real tools that you can use to keep communities together. And that's what we're doing in D3.
And how are you using those tools? And how are families engaged? How do you get families engaged? That's very important. We keep
Absolutely. So we have a Harlem Working Group, which is comprised of parent coordinators, families, and as well as the principal. And we meet every month, and we discuss data. We discuss all of the things that people want to see. We've been doing that in D3 since June 2023. And so we meet every single month, and that's where the proposals come from. And that's why they're great, and that's why they're so robust, because they come from community conversations and community. So when they get to a point where I need technical assistance, I call on my colleagues from the Office of District Planning. I call on my colleagues from FACE. I call on my colleagues from the Office of Enrollment. But that is generated every month from community conversations with all our 6 schools, in that particular case in Harlem. And now we have 2 other working groups that are now beginning to have the same conversation throughout our district. So the parent conversation is central to what we do.
During our monthly town hall series, we really consider them family opportunities. One of the things that we've moved towards is we're having middle school students participate with their families. So this past month, actually in May, Minnie Jean Brown, who was one of the original Little Rock 9, attended our virtual series and was interviewed by middle schoolers in District 13. And it was a real chance to have a cross-generational conversation around what does integration mean for schools, like what are our lived experiences, and how do these show up in our district?
So Chair Joseph, hi, how are you? And all committee members. Just to sum this all up, it's really about community engagement and how we foster community engagement in the process of what we do as a system. So when we're talking about CRSC and talking about the work, all the work is through the funneling of the channel of the community itself and where the community is. So in District 15, we use the PAR process, which is the Participatory Action Research. We started off in our neighborhoods as Red Hook and Sunset Park, which are our marginalized communities in District 15. And we started with a group of parents who worked independently with Maddie Fox, who was someone who we utilize as a resource to support, helping to move the work around understanding the community, understanding its history, and then understanding how do we move forward. In the conjunction of that, we developed our Youth and Adult Congresses, which is a group of parents on the Adult Congress and Youth Congress, so that we're fostering student voice, choice, and agency and advocacy from our community. The decisions around rezoning, mergers, programs being added in our district, all that is inclusive of the decision-making that parents come to. So when John Hammer spoke a little bit earlier and was talking about the inclusive schools, 958, and which is in Sunset Park. It's an inclusive school that has an AIMS program. That came about through the PAR process in Sunset Park, where the community said, we need this, we want this. And through the leadership of our central offices, have provided us the supports to actually have those programs happen in our district. It's flourishing. Everyone wants it. In Red Hook, having the ACES program that actually at PS15, which created more access to special ed services in the particular community, recognizing that sometimes, in some cases, some community members don't want to leave their neighborhood. They just want more services or more quality structures. And at the superintendent's level, we've been able to do that through the process of community engagement. I know you talked earlier about the CECs. Heavily involved with the CECs, walking through schools, figuring out which schools needed accessibility, which schools need elevators, which schools need more services. Adding schools sooner, for example. We have 428, which we opened a year sooner as a result of the Sunset Park PAR process, saying, hey, we want our middle school and we want it sooner. And by the way, we also want the Horizon program for middle school. I'm happy to say that we were just awarded that funding to be able to have the Horizon program for middle school in our Sunset Park community. And so it's all about the consistent engagement. In some cases, our communities will say, what you want is not what we want. And so we try to figure out other ways to address the needs of the community, because our priority is always going to be parental choice.
And just finally on this, finally on this, I think deep community engagement is required, especially in a district like mine. We have the Upper West Side as well as Harlem, and I think it's important because we have to figure out where interests converge. Everyone wants to be in a well-resourced, great school. And the question is a little bit how we get there. And we have to stay engaged. And this is what I do with Councilmember Brewer all the time with our communities. It cannot happen without that.
Chairs, over here, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I did have another question.
Go ahead.
Okay. My time was taken up by the answer. I want to just note, not by the question, but by the
She's getting her time back.
But we appreciate, all of the information, and those are the types of answers that we are, in fact, looking for, especially being on the record. But given today's topic and the recent decision from the Supreme Court to rule against the safety and livelihood of trans youth, as well as the Trump administration's decision to cut all funding for LGBTQ+ suicide prevention services, what is New York City Public Schools doing to affirm the existence and needs of trans and gender nonconforming students specifically, and the LGBTQIA+ student body more broadly? And thank you, chairs.
We have continued to and will always support our LGBTQIA+ community. In fact, when the executive orders came out, the first thing we did, just like we did with immigration, was have our legal team analyze and see what were the implications for us. Thanks to us living in this state, there are no implications for us. We continue to protect every single student who walks through our buildings. Not only do we protect them, we celebrate them. Our work with our GSAs, our celebrations for our students, our strategic pairing of social workers and communities to make sure that they are supporting young people in these very, very difficult times, as well as central-wide messaging to tell young people from all walks of life, you are protected, you are seen, you are valued, and we are here with you. We just recently held a celebration for our LGBTQ+ community at Tweed, where we heard from a number of students, we heard from a number of staff members. We also celebrated them at Yankee Stadium and their acceptance of scholarships after they wrote their essays talking about their journey. And one of the things that the team and I spoke about is how young people, we talk so much about the macro level and everything going on at the federal level, but what we still have to remember is that there are young people who are not being accepted and seen by their families. And so in many cases, we are their families. So we're also talking about what further supports can we provide to those specific young people whose families have not accepted their sexual identity. And that is something that we continue to do. In terms of the federal funding, this is why state funding is so important, because we know that it is a part of our budget, right, the federal funding, but it's a much smaller portion than our state funding. And so this is why we continue to tell the state, we need you to show up as big of a way as you possibly can, because the city has shown up in a very, very huge way. And so it is what it is at this point, but that doesn't mean that we are going to stop doing all the things that we've done and that we aren't going to do better.
Thank you so much, and thank you again,
Can I add
chairs.
in two quick? May I please
Yeah,
add in two?
please.
So sorry. I just wanted to also say that in District 13, our CEC, under the leadership of Cynthia McKnight, was the first CEC to pass a trans-affirming resolution across the entire city, and it's something that we're incredibly proud of. In District 13, we also run teacher training. They're called Teach Fabulous for all educators in District 13, and I have partnered with PFLAG actually to run parent groups for parents of gender-expansive youth, just to come and be. It's not about coming to fight or advocate. It's a chance for parents to come and say, what do you need as parents? What are ways that we can support you?
Thank you so much.
And that's why it was so important for this council to fund the LGBTQ+ curriculum, along with, thank you, Councilmember Hudson, for being a partner on this work. That's why it was so important for us. to fund that. One quick question on Black Studies. We talked a lot about that. Is there an implementation and expansion of the curriculum? Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Actually, as a matter of fact, Dr. Pate and I have been working on that very closely. Dr. Pate, I don't know if you want to join us and talk about that great
She's already
work.
Standing. She's a pro at this now.
See, they already know. They listen. They see you coming. So before I pass it over to Dr. Page, she and I have actually been working on this directly to talk about the specific expansion across certain districts and making sure that this isn't just something that lives in districts where superintendents stood up and said, hey, I want to do this. So now we're also picking some of the districts where we want to see expansion. Dr. Pate?
Yeah, so super excited about this. We are gearing up to go citywide with the Black Studies curriculum across all 45 districts, and superintendents are really going to be taking a lead in making sure that what the Black Studies curriculum rollout looks like is unique to their district and their needs. And what we've learned over time is that there is no one size fits best for every district or any district because they are all unique. So we've really asked superintendents to take the charge with this. They're going to be engaging their communities and figuring out what is needed and what teachers will need. We are building in capacity building opportunities for professional development, family opportunities to shift from parent and family engagement to family empowerment, which looks really, really different. And finally, the thing that is, I feel most exciting is the crosswalks that we're doing between civics and also our social studies passport work. So more to come on that, but it's right on the heels of it. I just had a meeting with Michelle the other day, who's my partner in crime in this, and we are working to make sure that we are up and running. So thanks for the question.
Well, thank you for that. How many schools are currently using the curriculum?
So we have over 300 plus schools. We have a phased-in approach, and we've completed the phase one. The spearheaders of that has been Superintendent Sean Davenport, his entire district. In addition, District 29, we have some work going on in Queens with Superintendent Van Ness. There's Kamar, there's Superintendent Megan, there's tons of superintendents who were a part of that phase one, but we learned from them. And now we know better what to do to ensure a really successful transition across the city in this upcoming school year. So super excited about that. More to come.
The other piece of it, Chair, just to add to this, is that we had also released Global African Diaspora as part of Hidden Voices, and I think that there was some confusion initially when that was rolled out. I think folks were talking about Hidden Voices, GAD, as the Black Studies curriculum, and they are two distinct things, which is also the case. We just released Hidden Voices Latine edition, but there is, thanks to the generosity of the council, we have a Black Studies curriculum as well as a Latine curriculum forthcoming. But what I will say is that the uniqueness of the Hidden Voices curricular resource, which is why we don't call it a curriculum, but as a curricular resource, is that it helps integrate the relative content into the standardized passport curriculum that is seen across our schools. So we're doubling down on this because we're making sure that Black Studies is alive and well in our standard social studies curriculum, and that there is also a Black Studies curriculum to go deeper and even have an isolated course that you can offer at a high school or a middle school in addition to your regular social studies class, which is really important.
And I would just add a final note that we have made the curriculum public for all of our teachers to have early access online. So it's already out there. Teachers have already begun to look at it and to think about creative ways to implement it. And now I think the next step for us is really doubling down on greater exposure and also the capacity building opportunities for teachers and building leaders.
Will there be opportunities for PDs? Are we engaging administrators as well? Because sometimes we come out with new curriculums and we don't show it to the administrator. They just either pay for it or they carry it, they put it in the classrooms and they walk away. How are we engaging administrators in this conversation?
Every single school that has been engaged around Black Studies curriculum, the principal has been part of that engagement process. As a matter of fact, when there are panels and where there are events, we see the principals just as much as we see the teachers. So they're very committed to this work.
And the curriculum is free, so.
You can stay there. What steps are New York City Public Schools taking to ensure that transfer students and students over the age of 21 have equitable access to diverse and inclusive school settings?
Done a lot of work in the D79 and transfer school space. This also starts with us making sure that the superintendencies are talking to each other. That bridge from high school into the transfer schools is super important. And so Superintendent Esperance, Superintendent John Sullivan, their conversations with the high school superintendents have been very important. I visited a number of the schools. As a matter of fact, of my first day as chancellor, I visited a D79 school and I spoke with the students, and they had a lot of concerns. One of their concerns was around space. One of their concerns was around traveling. They said, this is such a great program. We feel at home, but we have to go to all these different spaces. It's challenging, and just when we're getting comfortable, we're space isn't available for us. So we're working really closely with the superintendents to make sure that we're addressing those concerns, and that we're continuing the conversation with them.
What about students in transfer schools that have IEPs? What kind of support are they getting? Sometimes I hear from principals that they're not getting the support they need. So we would really love to see that part in meeting their needs, and also our bilingual students who end up in transfer schools. How are we supporting those students?
Well, Chair, one of the things that I know you know well is that the IEP has to be absolutely correct and finalized before these young people enter into the transfer schools or into an alternative school, right? We need to make sure that those evaluations are done and that IEPs are written well. And here's John coming on up. But, and Brenda. Sorry, John, I thought that was you. You guys look so much alike.
Yeah, Chancellor's absolutely right. I mean, part of this is ensuring that the IEPs are well developed, and then we're implementing services for students in District F79 settings, just as we would do in every other school. And it's definitely work that we've been doing pretty deeply in P2G, and it's work that we have to continue to strengthen and improve on. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Our Chief of Multilingual Learners, Brenda Garcia, is here as well. She can talk a little bit about bilingual supports.
Good afternoon, Chair Joseph. Thank you for your advocacy for multilingual learners over the years. We have partnered over the years with Superintendent Sullivan specifically. A few years ago, we launched a true effort to increase bilingual transfer schools, and that work has continued. We have, from the Office of Multilingual Learners, provided funding to Superintendent Sullivan, who's been partnering very closely with Superintendent Esperance in District 79 on ensuring that they are bringing the best practices and expanding them across all schools. So they've been partnering specifically with the Internationals Network and doing a lot of professional learning in that area, and we plan to continue to support that work. In addition, we have been advocating with the state in terms of expanding GED availability in languages beyond Spanish, which we know is a real need. And so we've had conversations collaboratively with the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages at the state and Superintendent Esperance.
That was going to be one of my follow-up questions, and having the opportunity to have GED programming in different languages. One of the biggest requests I had especially was around having the GED in French. So that was very important. Transfer schools, I know advocates have been asking for one in Brooklyn. We don't have one in Brooklyn. A bilingual. Mm-hmm.
We can certainly look at the data and look at what supporting Superintendent Sullivan and expanding that work in Brooklyn would look like.
Thank you. I will come back, and now I'm going to pass it over to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much. Just like others, PFLAG is fabulous, and I think I've told you, Chancellor, District 79, I'm working with a lot of the African immigrants. They are fabulous at District 79. The reason that Kamar Samuels, one reason is so successful is, of course, he offers food at his events, and it is not plant-based. And so people eat it. I just want to make that clear. Also, he has great, he just had a phenomenal robotics program and a phenomenal civics program, bringing people together. There was one kid named Max. He was better than Abraham Lincoln in terms of what he had to say. So it's just, that works. It really works. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, in terms of, I'm a supporter of G&T. Not everybody is, but I am. And I wanted to know from your perspective, in order to increase admissions for communities of color, I think the citywide admissions test for G&T was replaced with a lottery system in 2021. And then there was an expansion of seats. So I didn't know if these efforts have increased admissions of communities of color, and can you share the data on that issue? The reason I say that is I'm obviously a big supporter of Anderson. And they are not ecstatic about this new program. They feel like before they could make the community more diverse. I would love to see more G&T. I'd love to have it much more diverse. There are so many kids of that 99.9% in our city, and I believe they should get this opportunity. But how do we make them more diverse?
Thank you, council member, and I'll make sure that next time you visit us at Tweed, we don't give you veggies.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Although I have to tell you, I had some slamming peppers from a school in Queens that they grew from their hydroponic lab the other day.
I like it from the hydroponics. That's fine. That's delicious. Just not from, and I love Chris, but not from him.
I got you. So our philosophy remains that when it comes to G&T, that we respond to the needs of the community. This is why it's so important for us. If a community overwhelmingly says they want more G&T programs, then we're going to work with the superintendent to expand them and to discuss, some of the nuances in enrollment. Trevante is going to take it away.
Sure, thank you for your question. So we've seen an increase in Black and Latino student representation since we eliminated the G&T exam. Officer students in higher needs also increased by 42% that year compared to 2 years ago. The percent of Black kindergarteners in G&T programs rose for 4% in school year 20 to 2021 to 14% in 23 to 24. And Hispanic representation, as I mentioned, also increased from 8% to 16% over the same period. However, to your point, we have gotten feedback from educators and families who are not in love with the lottery system, and so we've been working across just trying to see exactly how we can make that balance. But that is the information that we do.
Okay, the woman named Donna Smiley, who just retired from Anderson, and she would be somebody to talk to because she, I think, is talking about this around the United States and would be helpful in trying to achieve our joint goals. One other quick question. In order to create better schools across the board, does magnet school work? In other words, if you have some kind of a draw to that school, is that something that helps in terms of quality and diversity? I don't know, I'm just asking.
I have to be honest with you. We have to do a deeper dive into the benefits coming out of magnet schools. Right now, because we know that diversity and equity are a priority, we need to look at all options. So looking forward to doing further research on that, particularly zoning in on the successes that our magnet schools have had, and then happy to speak with you further about what we find and then coming up with an action plan.
All right, and then we have Black, Latino, and Jewish curriculum. How the hell are you going to get all those into the schools? You got 3 people. I'm sure somebody else is going to pop up with their ideas too. I can't wait.
It's New York City, council member.
I know.
Everybody gets a curriculum, and that's what
I
we're
know,
all
but
about.
I think it's not fair to you to try to figure it all out.
But actually, it's a charge that I welcome because
Okay.
I'd rather us at Central help the schools figure that out so they're not negotiating based on their own preferences what's more important. And this is why the curricular resources with Hidden Voices are an excellent way to bring that content into the standard passport curriculum. Now, in addition to that, there's also a Black Studies curriculum. There is a Latinx Studies curriculum coming, as well as a Jewish curriculum coming.
I have it right here.
But that said, those classes can be taught as standalone courses, and there's also a way to integrate some of those units of study into both your English classes and your social studies classes. So there's a lot of flexibility, and our teaching and learning department is very eager to work with schools on those integrations.
Thank you very much. And I also agree about accessible schools. I have many friends in wheelchairs, and they actually have to meet with their children in the playground So these are the parents who, so I know you're working at it, but people forget that the parents also need accessible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we also have the AAPI curriculum coming out. It's a true reflection of what New York City is about. So they are needed in this space. So who has final authority over drawing or redrawing school zone boundaries? Whose job is that? And how do you pick the districts you draw the lines? How do you pick it? What's the process? Walk me through it.
Chair, before Yael talks about the process, you heard a little bit from superintendents. Hopefully we'll have time to hear more from them. The process that Superintendent Samuels described and Alvarez and Dunn described, where these ideas come from community conversations, that's the same is true with rezoning. And so while Yael's team, and she'll talk about it in their constant conversation with superintendents, might point out data and might look at how residential patterns are changing and flag it for them. What we do is support the superintendents as they're hearing that a community might be interested in rezoning, and then there is a very particular process. But Yael, why don't you go through that?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question, Chair Joseph. The rezoning process is inherently collaborative between NYCPS, CECs, and communities. NYCPS works really closely with those CECs to develop the idea for the rezoning, the possible scenarios that a rezoning could look like, drawing maps, sharing data, digging into the implications, partnering hand in hand with CECs to do the community engagement. That looks like a million different things in every different community. SLT meetings, PTA meetings, CEC meetings, meetings with all of you when these are happening in your districts, but also really localized efforts to make sure that both we and the CECs are understanding the reality on the ground and what it's going to look like for the families who are impacted by the ultimate proposal. So as you've heard from some of the superintendents, and they can share a little bit more, that has looked like neighborhood walks, surveys of communities, the participatory action research process that Superintendent Alvarez spoke to, and similar processes. Ultimately, our office, the Office of District Planning, does a lot of the heavy lifting around crunching data, drawing maps, engaging around those possible scenarios with the CECs in the impacted communities. Ultimately, we deliver a proposal to the CEC that the CEC has to approve. So we cannot rezone without CEC approval. CECs cannot put forward or implement a rezoning without a proposal coming from NYCPS. So it's really a very collaborative process. And just to your earlier question about how we identify these opportunities, that is also very collaborative. I will say a lot of times it is triggered by a new building or an expansion on an existing building. So when we have an opportunity to open a new zoned school or to expand a zoned school, those are sort of the very obvious triggers for those conversations. Other times it comes up through mergers or truncations or closures of zoned schools that we work on, again, with superintendents in the communities. And then other times, simply in our conversations in partnership with superintendents and CECs, we may identify opportunities to rezone across existing schools for one reason or another. But I'll turn it to the superintendents to speak a little bit more about what this looks like on the ground for them.
Chair, did you want them to jump in now? You might have had follow-up questions on rezonings.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you prioritize voices of marginalized communities in this process? Right? We have communities that are more engaged than the others. How do we engage that voice? And how many rezonings have you done so far? Anybody has a number?
Yep. So in the last 10 years, we have done 28 rezonings at the elementary level, impacting 135 schools.
Can you share that, not now, but can you email that to us, the list of schools that you have done the rezoning?
Absolutely.
And to my question, how are you elevating voices of marginalized communities in this process?
Yeah, I think that's, again, what the superintendents can speak to.
Yeah, so it was 28 rezonings. I've been responsible for 2 across 2 districts. In District 13, we started with as you said, it can be triggered by a merger of a school. So when we merged Arts and Letters 305, it triggered a rezoning in the Bed-Stuy area, which meant that we had to engage the Bed-Stuy community about what we wanted to do. And we had several meetings with maps, with different options for what they needed to, what they wanted to think about. And I want to say in all of these are not absent disagreements. These are not absent pushback, but what we do is to really make sure that we have the skill set to keep folks engaged so we can come to some real agreement around. So, and in the District 3 context, that was more recent actually, where we had this reciting and merger that created an opportunity for us to have a rezoning conversation. That one, it was in the context of our Harlem Working Group that we had been engaging in, and they had come up with the proposal to begin with. So they had questions about what would this mean for the remaining schools, and we had to get the Office of District Planning to work out our options there. We had in District 13, the option was to keep pretty much similar similar zoning. In District 3, it was actually quite different. It led to a shared zone, so now all of our Harlem schools operate under the same zone, and that was voted on by our CEC unanimously after significant engagement.
The partnerships have been with the CECs to start off with, but to your point around the marginalized communities in District 15, that would be our Sunset Park, Red Hook, and Gowanus communities. They underwent the PAR process, which we will submit an abridged version of the PAR process and what it entailed, so that every member has on the committee for your review. What we did there is really engage the communities, those particular communities specifically, with the process of understanding the historical disparities in their communities, understanding from their perspective, but also the history that's gone way before them, and thinking about what were some possible recommendations and next steps. For example, one of the zonings, the CEC was able to vote on it from the recommendation that came from the report from the community that recommended certain things around sub-zoning within communities to ensure that there's more forms of integration, which the CEC was able to buy into. Again, all of this about community engagement. On the opposite end, we're talking about when there's possibilities of mergers. So for example, I recognize, for example, PS10 and 295 that was on the list that was discussed. In those particular cases, we engaged those particular 2 schools around the possibility of merging into one school for the purposes of integration and other things. What we came to find out is that's not what both communities wanted. But what we were able to get as a result of the conversations was agreement for the schools to work in partnership with professional development, to work in partnership with PTAs from one school to the other, collectively and collaboratively. And the goal is over time to find ways to get them to integrate so that over time they're actually thinking about more integration as we think about other things that we have to focus on in the future.
And if I could just add one more point to drive this home. All of the engagements and community conversations that the superintendents have talked about, we've worked really hard over the last few years to more and more bring those conversations into the communities. So we know that not everyone is going to come to every CEC meeting where information is being presented. We've been working really hard to not only present there with translations and interpretations and to make sure that word is getting out about those meetings, but going to tenants associations in impacted NYCHA housing projects, going to pre-K centers in the area, and to local CBO-run pre-K centers so that the families who would be most impacted by these initiatives are finding out before they show up to enroll in schools and didn't know what was happening. So appreciate working with these superintendents to
Are we
continue.
leaning also on the faith-based community as well? Because they play a huge role in how this goes. But how do you evaluate whether existing school zones contribute to racial and socioeconomic segregation within those districts that you are rezoning? How are you looking at that?
Yeah, and so something to really point out here is when you isolate rezoning, quite frankly, we've seen those situations not work. So when we look at the rezoning of PS8 and 307 in my former district, District 13. When we look at the rezoning of the Upper West Side, rezoning by itself hasn't led to more integrated schools in those situations. Why? Because we still have parent choice. Schools are still funded by the number of students in them. So if schools have space, they're going to accept the folks that apply. So I think it's important to think through this notion of rezoning as a singular lever. I think we have to think about it more holistically, because when we have, in the recent past, when we've approached with only rezoning, we don't see schools become more integrated because of it. And I'm sure Yael can add more on that.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit more to some of the data that we're looking at, and thank you for raising some of these questions and encouraging us to look a little bit differently at some of the data that we, have gotten so used to working with. So a couple of the analyses that we've been running and are continuing to dig into are looking at both how representative are our zoned elementary schools of the demographics of their zones, and where do we see adjacent zones that have significantly different demographics within the resident population. So I think overall we do see that most of our zoned elementary schools do represent their zones. They're not necessarily serving exclusively students from their zones, but nonetheless we do see that by and large, about 85% of our zone schools do reflect the demographics of the zones they serve. We have also been looking at, I think, close to 1,500 pairs of adjacent elementary school zones within a given district. And what we found there is, I think there are about 5% of them do show a pretty significant difference in the demographics zone to zone. As we look into them, what we're finding is some of these are zones that we have already touched or already engaged with, and there are some incredibly complicated factors to tease apart when we think about who's going to these schools, why are they going to these schools, what does zoning have to do with it. We are also finding that in some of these instances there are real geographic barriers that families don't want to cross. And so I think this is where we come back to the notion of how do we bring great schools, great programs, and equitable access to those programs to families regardless of their zone, and make sure that they can access them closer to home.
Schools, great schools in every neighborhood, not just, I've always said this as an educator and also as the chair, it should be no matter what your zip code is, I'm getting a quality education. My school building I walk into is not crumbling. And I visited school buildings that when we talk about equity, that's also a space where we need to be on the equitable side, is also school buildings. Schools, some of the buildings I've been to and I'm like, oh my goodness. So this is where we also have to step up and really invest in our school buildings when we talk about equity. But we also have to look at neighborhoods that are gentrifying at a rapid rate, and Brooklyn is one of those areas that is gentrifying at a fast pace. So therefore, we must also look at that data and see how we adjust and meet the needs of the students. When we talk about meeting the moment, this is it. Councilmember Marmorato, it's your turn.
Thank you. Can you just walk me through what the protocol is when a choking incident does take place on school grounds?
When a choking incident takes place, well, first of all, we assess the situation and we make sure that someone who is trained in the Heimlich maneuver, that they attend to the child immediately. We have school nurses, we sound the alarm, make sure that people are responding immediately. This is why we have trained professionals. It's incredibly important.
Okay, is there like a response team put together in each school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and how many members are on that response team?
Chief Rampersant, I know you just joined.
Do I need to get sworn in? I mean, am I good? I swear. Yes, every one of our schools.
Council, do you want to swear?
I'm sorry, yes.
Chief Rampersant?
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
How are you? Thank you. So the question is, what do we do in a case of a choking incident of a student? First and foremost, you should rest assured that every one of our schools has to do what is called a school safety plan. As part of that safety plan, we have to outline everybody who is CPR and AED trained. We cannot complete the plan until we do. If we have a young person who is in fact choking to the point of choking period, we have people who are trained to respond. The way by which we respond is over the PA system. We call it code blue. And then there's a response team that shows up. That can be the nurse. Usually our gym teachers, all of our phys ed teachers are certified in AED, as well as some members of the building response team. They respond and provide aid. The amount of aid is determined by, how severe the
Also
choking
our
is.
coaches. We have a number of coaches who are pedagogues who are not necessarily PE teachers, which allows for a contingency plan should somebody who is trained not be present in the building at that time. There are other people in the building who can participate.
Our phys ed teams can't happen unless there are trained people that are on record.
Okay. It's interesting that you keep bringing up somebody that's trained in AED, because what is an AED machine? It's used after CPR is not actually working, and that is the point of my bill. I understand that the Heimlich maneuver is the first line of defense,
Correct,
medically across the board, and that if in certain cases or circumstances, this is a new device that can help, God forbid, we're ever in a situation like that. So this is why this is kind of a little important to push this forward. What specific guidelines exist for handling choking emergencies involving students in wheelchairs or that have other physical or non-visible disabilities?
Yeah, so wheelchairs, I'm not sure that the certification is different. I know that they are held differently, but all of our D75 schools are following the same protocol in terms of the staff that are trained to provide those respective aids.
Okay. Okay. And are there any implementation concerns that the Department of Education foresees with this legislation, such as training requirements, legal liability, medical concerns, or cost of the device?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
I have some follow-up questions on the wonderful work that the superintendents have been doing. How do we replicate this work across the system? And how do you prioritize? Is it based off of like a wonderful individual, or is it based on your office determining which school districts should be prioritized for that type of work? Because it was really nice to hear that they like walked all these schools and looked at elevators. Like I still have quite a few schools that are inaccessible. There's a school in particular I'm thinking about, Bloomberg, put some type of garden on their roof, but because they don't have an elevator, it's just inoperable. So would love to know, one, how can you duplicate their work across the system? And then how do you prioritize which school districts get that level of intention?
Yeah, so we're very grateful to the three amazing superintendents who are here. You'll have to trust us that we weren't cherry picking chair. These are wonderful
That's what it feels
superintendents,
like,
but
D29, D28 does not have that level of intention at all.
okay. Certainly, as with any other human endeavor, skill level is always going to vary. But in terms of the charge that the chancellor gives to superintendents, and I think they would all attest to this, it is to do fundamentally what you're hearing they're doing, which is putting an ear to the ground, being very closely in touch, not just with the community generally, because they all have districts that are very large and diverse, but to every corner of the community, every school community, every housing development, et cetera, that they and their teams are in constant contact. They are creating forums to have these conversations. And I will say, yes, if we have superintendents who aren't leaning into it as much as these superintendents, that's why we have central teams that are meeting with those superintendents, providing data, asking them. They have chiefs that are pushing them on these issues. What are we doing about this particular community that's been asking for additional programming to serve autistic students, et cetera, et cetera? So the model is very much that both the bridge to the community is through the superintendent and their teams, and the accountability for that is at the superintendent level. So they can also tell you, I'm sure, about some sweaty palm moments when some of their people are saying to the chancellor, hey, we haven't heard back from the superintendent about this issue that we're really concerned about. That doesn't happen that often. But
so,
go ahead.
I have to address a couple of things. Number one, CEC partnership and collaboration is critical to this piece. And so the chancellor, we were one of the districts that piloted the collaboration this year, and we looked really closely at our facilities, right? So something you were talking about, facilities. All that we have a report coming out after analyzing all our BCAS reports, and that was something that the chancellor really put forward. Now, with regards to other superintendents, I think we at the office, the Division of School Leadership, have a really great structure around collaboration. So you mentioned districts 28, 20, and 29. I now know those two superintendents way better over the last.
Dr. Bonds is retiring.
Yeah, and
so she's out.
And the
then,
28, the work.
And Dr. Blake just got there.
Right, and so we collaborate with those two superintendents. Dr. Blake, the work he actually, we sat down to discuss the podcast you mentioned earlier, the School Colors podcast. We talked about that podcast and how he can approach and listen to the work that's happening in his schools. And so we meet monthly to really think about concerns. He had many different things that he was working on, and that's one thing that I know is on his mind because we've talked about it.
Yeah, I think my concern always is, of course, it's such a huge system, and there's so many layers within the system, and I'm always trying to figure out how, and not that all communities and all school districts require or need the same things, because I also don't think it should be a one-size-fits-all, but I do think where you are piloting these really good programs, or you've seen success within particular school districts, that there should be some type of concerted effort to really duplicate that, especially whatever best practice model you're assessing into other school districts. And I have not seen it in the school districts that are in my area, and I would endeavor to say, if we polled a lot of people, because here's a good question. Do you think all school districts are doing what you're doing?
I think the best practice is listening, right? So I think.
No, but that's the question. Like, do you think all school districts are operating at the same? Exactly.
They're
so
not.
I would, thank you.
And so, if I may, the strategy is to make sure that we are strategically curating the best practices, but that we're also evaluating them as best practices. What I don't want is superintendents sharing best practices that have not been deemed to be a best practice by all of us centrally.
Absolutely. So if you can share like your strategy, because that was like my original question, like what is the strategy to, at some point, I'm not saying you have to do it tomorrow, but like even if you do it 3 years from now, but what is the strategy, or how are you thinking about how to scale this amazing work across the system?
That is the strategy. The strategy is by working with our team to identify best practices in myriad areas across the superintendencies and saying this superintendent is great in these instructional practices. This superintendent is great in working with his or her community. This superintendent is really great in working with their facilities folks, right? Because not everyone is great at everything. And so identifying where are their pockets of success, and then we can host professional learning communities where superintendents are training each other and sharing, like, how did I get here, right? It's not only about the destination, it's about the journey. When I first inherited this district, I had these challenges, I did this needs assessment, et cetera, et cetera.
Are you doing that work now, or you're saying that is the plan moving forward?
We have started that work, which is why I launched a superintendent and principal advisory council. Prior to that, we had a principal advisory council, but I added superintendent, so that way we're identifying leaders at the school and district level. They filled out a survey around some of the pressing issues that plague the districts and the schools, and now we're breaking them off into subcommittees, so that way they can start leading that work over the summer, but it has started. Early stages, but it has started.
Do you have any like goals or metrics around like how you plan to scale that? So outside of the conversations, again, like in practice, like if I'm superintendent A, I do this great, I'm superintendent B, I do something else great, but maybe you want to merge. Maybe I take a little bit of what you're doing. When, I guess as like the chancellor, like do you have a timeline or goals around like when certain school districts would actually implement these best practices that you have deemed best practices?
So I hate that I can't give you more specificity, but it depends on the needs assessment of the district. If some needs are greater than others, and for me to sit here and say that the timeline is the same for every district would be hypocritical. And that's why the needs assessments have to start now, as we close out this year and as we form these committees, so that way we can figure out what the appropriate goals and timelines are.
Okay, thank you. Just some follow-up questions on zoning. What I took from the answers is that there's no uniform process. It seems like the process is based off of whatever collaboration in whatever area, which is great because that means we are attuning our efforts based off of the needs of particular communities. But then I also am like not sure how to even properly evaluate what you're doing because it doesn't seem like there's any benchmarks or criteria for how you even assess what the different recommendations are. So I'm sure you might have it, I guess it just wasn't shared. So if you do have that.
Yes, so there is a lot more structure that applies across the board that I'm happy to talk about. So when we work with the community and identify an opportunity to rezone or a need to rezone that may be triggered by a merger or a new building opening that will house a zone school, we start by, it is more of an art than a science, so there's a lot of conversation from the community, getting feedback and input from the CEC before we even start digging into data and drawing maps so we can understand which schools should be involved. So we look at a host of data, including utilization rates, demographics, residential construction in the area, so we get data from DCP around housing starts and projected residential growth. So all of that gets factored in as we start to have these conversations with CECs, with principals, bless you, with school communities, to understand, how far should we be reaching, right? Sometimes a rezoning might be, there's two adjacent zones, we move a line a little bit, boom. Other times, there's a new school opening in one zone, we carve out a zone for it, we also pull in from surrounding zones to balance it out. So essentially what we have to do is figure out where can we draw lines that are practical for families that also result in the right number of students living in the zone. And so to determine that, we look at historically how many kids who live in the zone go to a given school, how many, what has happened in the zone recently, and looking at all of those enrollment trends. And so it is a very iterative process where we look at sort of a pretty defined set of data, go through it with CECs, school leadership teams, community members, draw maps, get feedback, redraw the maps, go back again. So it kind of goes on and on like that until we have a map where the CEC seems to be on board, we're getting positive feedback from the community, and we do feel that we're ready for a vote, and that's the point at which we submit an official proposal to the CEC. The CEC then has 45 days to vote on it, and once they vote on it, we can move ahead and implement it for the following school year typically.
But adding on to what she said, the structure though is every single year, we sit with every superintendent in the city sits with the Office of District Planning and other departments throughout Central, and they tell us, okay, these are the priorities of the chancellor, these are the things we want to really look into. They give us a vast amount of data to review, and then we look at our districts and sometimes talk to each other and come up with what we want to engage in based on the priorities of the chancellor. And we also have our DCEPs that we strategically actually look and try to set goals and play out through this process as well. So that's the structure that we work with.
Thank you. And I'm happy that she mentioned DCP. So I actually have a neighborhood plan that I'm doing in Jamaica, and the draft environmental impact statement does stipulate that there will be a need for increase in school seats. All the schools in that circumference are already at capacity. And so just wondering how you make those assessments, and are you thinking about planning now? We hope that the plan gets passed and comes to the council in the fall, but how are you assessing that as another example, the Queens High School of Sciences is in that area. They also did a resolution, by the way. They want a new school. Should mention that. I know they're in my district, whatever. And then for instance, there's a school that's being built on Hillside. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about what's gonna go there. Is it gonna be an elementary school? Is it gonna be Queens High School? So I know they're petitioning for that. York Early College Academy, which is another really good school, is co-located in a middle school in my district. So all of the schools that I just mentioned are all in the study map for the Jamaican Neighborhood Plan. So I would love to, if you have thoughts now, we can talk offline, but would love to know in general how you make those assessments, when you make those assessments, and if you are thinking and planning about school seats in the Jamaica area.
Yeah, so we should definitely follow up. There's a lot to dig into here. And yeah, we're really excited about the Hillside building. It is high school capacity, which is desperately needed in Queens, and in this part of Queens in particular. We are in initial conversations with communities about how to best use that space. As you just described, there are really a million different ways we could make excellent use of it. And so we want to make sure that, as with rezonings, we are hearing from communities, we are weighing all the options and coming out with an equitable outcome that best meets the needs of students and families. In neighborhood rezonings like the one you're describing in Jamaica, so we do, again, partner really closely, not just with DCP, but also with the School Construction Authority. They obviously have a very large role in helping to figure out where those new school seats are going to go and what the timeline is. You know, it's a bit of a delicate dance as we try to assess when these housing units will be realized, when the residential growth will be realized, and then when the necessary school seats come online. I know we're sort of having some similar conversations right now over in District 30 around some new capacity coming online there and figuring out how to both address projected housing growth and some existing overutilization within the capacity that we do have at the moment. So we'll have continuing conversations, and we look forward to partnering with you on that.
Yeah, I'm just, again, concerned because so many of the schools in that area are currently at capacity, largely because of the migrant crisis that we had. So yeah, I'm just concerned about what's gonna happen to those schools. And Dr. Pate, not that Dr. Pate, but the other Dr. Pate is on the Community Advisory Council that I have, and it's been helpful, even though she's not a D28 superintendent, for her to talk about like what this means for the school. But yes, would love to talk more about that. You specifically mentioned that there were incredibly complicated factors around how you make certain determinations about why certain students are going to certain schools or certain school districts. Can you just talk a little bit more about what those incredibly complicated factors are?
Yeah, I mean, family choice is nuanced and individual, so we obviously can't speak to the choices that individual families make, but I do think that, you know, we see families who are looking for a specific type of school in their neighborhood and it may not exist, and so they choose to travel. We see some families who believe deeply in being able to go to their neighborhood school and they want to stay there, you know, regardless of whether it's the most integrated option or has sort of everything that a school a mile or two away can offer. So I think, you know, a place where we really saw this come up especially prominently was in the District 15 rezoning in Red Hook, where we did the PAR process. You know, transparently, we started that rezoning without the partnership of Maddie Fox and the PAR team, and it was tough, right? There were so many neighborhoods, so many communities, everyone wanted something else, and we had so many goals of that rezoning. So we were trying to rezone students to fill new construction at one of our schools. We were trying to alleviate overcrowding at a couple of the schools in the area. And we were trying to integrate across zones because they are quite different from each other in this area. You know, sort of Red Hook, Carroll Gardens. How do you tackle that all in one project? As we dug in deeper, it became abundantly clear, and we heard clear feedback from those communities that, like, we need a different process. We slowed down, We brought in the PAR team. Again, that was all done in partnership with the CEC, who had a voice in who that partner organization was going to be and what that process was going to look like. They took time. They used the resources that they had, community members who wanted to be a part of this. It was a representative group, and I see you now all have the report in front of you for some light reading when this is done. They went out and they spoke to everybody, and they had focus groups and interviews and conversations, and they came back with a really robust set of recommendations. And what we heard was not, redraw the zone lines to create integrated schools. What we heard was, give us that option, but also give us the option of staying close to home. Don't make us cross the BQE. Don't make us go to schools that don't feel like they are part of our community, and don't, sort of unweave the fabric of our community by drastically changing it in the name of this value if we haven't had a say in it. And what we ended up doing there was actually quite interesting and extensive. We drew zone lines that kind of aimed to achieve all of this as much as possible, but at our schools where drawing diverse zones was incredibly challenging just because of residential segregation, we drew those lines in a way that allowed us to keep seats for out-of-zone students who could be admitted using the diversity and admissions initiative that we've talked about a few times today. So in that way, we were able to say to families in Red Hook, you can stay zoned to a Red Hook school, but you will also have priority to these other schools through DIA if you want to exercise that option. And then we also actually completely reconfigured the Red Hook Neighborhood School, PS 676, from an elementary school that was just historically under-enrolled and really struggling, in partnership with the community and the PAR process, actually converted it into a middle school. It has multiplied in size. It is incredibly diverse in a way that, I think is all that we could have hoped for and more from that process. So.
Yeah, I will endeavor to say something controversial, which is I actually think integration was harmful to Black communities in a lot of ways, because it kind of like crippled and weakened, for us, by us, community right to determination. So yes, I'm not, just for the record, I agree with the Chancellor's testimony. I don't think moving kids into a school with other type of kids equal academic success. And I think, as has been the common thread, I think, from us and from you, which is great, we're on the same page, that all school children, their parents, families, they should have choice if they want to move their children around. But like, if they want to send their kid up the block, they should be able to do that. I know in my district we have a problem of what I call like cream of the crop kids. Their parents are not sending them to the school up the block, and I hear it all the time. They yell at me because they feel like the school is not a good school and they pay all these taxes on their properties, but they're sending their school to like Sacred Heart up the block, or they're sending their child to some other private school. And so I know that's a whole nother problem about like just socioeconomic kind of diversity within the same community, because that is definitely the problem in Southeast Queens, because again, a lot of the parents, I'd say, that are the more of the well-to-do parents, most of them do not have their children in the public schools that are walking distance from their homes, which is again another challenge. Just want to turn over my questions to screen schools. So currently there are 69 middle school programs that screen students for admissions. What are the main reasons superintendents have given for reinstating screen schools post-COVID-19? And how many middle schools will implement screens for the 2025-2026 school year? And last but not least, how many of the 69 schools are gifted and talented programs?
Thank you so much for your question. I think the most general way to answer the question is that they work with their communities to determine if they're going to maintain screening in their schools or not. We work with our superintendents to understand exactly what it is that they're looking for those schools. We also use data to make sure that we can discourage sometimes add-in screens because we do understand that what they may be trying to achieve in their schools, just in terms of sometimes it's increasing enrollment, is not always going to be the outcomes. So that is usually the conversation. Now, in terms of the specific data questions that you have, I don't have them on hand, but I can definitely provide them to you at a later time for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know where we're asking that question because screen schools can eliminate opportunities for certain students to potentially matriculate in them.
Right, which is, we definitely understand and we're on the same page about that. But I also want to say that our process, we do, have a process in which we believe is one of the fairest processes that we have put in place over years, where we're looking at the top % of kids across, specifically in a school, but also within districts. And so once we have that, we're able to increase the representation of all demographics in our screen schools, and we do have data that shows that as well.
Thank you. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I so agree. There's a middle school in Brooklyn, Medgar Evers Middle School and High School. It is a gem, and majority of the students who attend the school are Title I students, but they all look like me. And what they're achieving in Brooklyn is magic. And I've always shouted them out, and I told Dr. Wilshire that I'm going to shout him out for the amazing work. The kids are cornerstones. They are on every honorary society they can be. Those are the things we also want to celebrate as when we talk about diversity and all of those other things. I'm going to say the most controversial thing ever, Councilmember Williams. Is that okay? The schools that are highly anticipated, students who want to go there, why are we not capping enrollment and allowing them to go into other schools? I know we had this conversation before.
Why are we not capping enrollment in the schools that are the most desirable?
GNT program, create new programs at under-enrolled schools and help balance the diversify.
But I think so the reason I'm repeating the question is because I think that's what we have been doing in this administration. I think rather than cap and say now you have to go to a place that you might not want, what we are doing is creating more desirable programs in neighborhoods where you otherwise might not have them. Again, thinking about BARD, Bronx, BARD, Brooklyn, thinking about HBCU. These are programs in schools that we're standing up in communities to say, hey, you can still want to get into these other schools, but these are not the only great schools that exist here. Look at these other programs and you don't have to travel far to. They're right in your neighborhood. And I'm so glad that you brought up Medgar Evers because actually I just visited. And one of the things that when we think about screen, in talking with the principal, they're not screening for just test scores. It's looking at your grades and the schools that you're coming from and parent commitment to being able to sustain a 12-month model, because those babies are going to school all year.
Yep, all year.
All with up until 5, 6 o'clock, and sometimes even on Saturdays, right? Because they have a very specific model. So I think when we're thinking about screens, we're also just going back to the previous question. We're thinking about a number of factors, not just test scores. As a matter of fact, test scores are generally not what we're looking at.
We're looking at the whole child.
We're looking at the whole child. But in terms of these schools, our strategy has not been to tell people, no, we don't want you to go into these schools that you consider desirable. We want to make more desirable schools, and we want to put them in your neighborhoods. But part of that is the engagement with the superintendents to figure out what are the community's needs and desires in a school. We don't want you to just want to say, I live in a school district where, it is not, it's a tale of two cities. You have some folks who are making a higher income and definitely many who are not. My daughter is in a very mixed school. It's very mixed socioeconomic. But part of our responsibility is also to make sure that all schools have high quality curriculum and instruction, so you don't have to make those choices. I don't want to have to send my kid 2 districts away because the school up the block isn't good. It's my responsibility as the chancellor to make sure that the school up the block is great, just as it is 2 districts away. And so we've done a number of things. One is New York City reads and solves, and I know that we talk about it all the time, and everybody's like, it's not the silver bullet, Chancellor, you got to start talking about other things, but it is equity work, because if you have to live in a certain geographic district in order to get into a good school, that's not acceptable. Number 2 is making sure that we're expanding those programs. So rather than shutting the doors, you should still apply to those schools and have an opportunity to get into them. But when there's more, then those schools do not remain to be like the end-all be-all. We just need more great schools. But to do that, we have to listen to the communities that they would sit in.
Is there a need assessment when you do also look into that? Is there a need assessment, and how do we center voices of community? I know you say you do, but not every parent go to CEC. Not every parent is on a SLT. How do we center parent, and are we talking to young people? As we always want to make decisions for them and not with them, how do we engage young people also? We also have to center their voices.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to the sort of annual needs assessment district planning process that I think Superintendent Samuels referenced earlier. So I think every spring, we release these just a couple of weeks ago, our office compiles updated data on sort of everything from utilization and enrollment, retention rates, enrollment patterns, really trying to share data with superintendents and CECs to give them a clear picture of what is going on in your district. We sit down with the superintendents first to just kind of dig into that data and think about where is the data pointing us and what are we hearing on the ground. We then share that with CECs. That data is publicly available online as well. And we have ongoing conversations with CECs and communities about what are we seeing in that data. But again, that really doesn't tell the whole story until we get out and hear from communities. And I think what you described is something we're continuing to work on and look for different strategies, and that is a localized approach of how do we get to every family, how do we hear from those underrepresented voices, and I think that is a big part of how we did wind up opening BARD Bronx, BARD Brooklyn, and this September HBCU prep in Southeast Queens, because as we got out into communities and we started to hear, we want these schools, we don't want to have to travel for them, we need them here. So doing more of that work in close partnership with the Office of New Schools as well, and really thinking about what are the innovative models that are out there, and then how do we get out to communities where we have opportunities and needs to open new schools, whether that need is based on, hey, we have a space, or we have an actual seat need, or we are just hearing from a community, there is something we don't have.
Yeah, in District 3, and I think all of the superintendents represented here, none of us reinstated screens after COVID, and that took a lot of community effort to do. In my district in particular, 97% of parents get one of their top 3 choices to middle schools, and so our lottery system is working and working well.
This goes back to your question, though, Chair Williams, when you asked about best practices. Yes, there's standard rules of engagement, CECs, et cetera, but we know that that's not enough because to Chair Joseph's point, not everyone is sitting on a CEC. These superintendents go above and beyond to engage in additional and creative ways, whether that's virtually, whether that's in person, going to actual school events, hosting events, et cetera. So again, this is a way for us to say, hey, this is the standard practice, but here are additional things that superintendents are doing that are working when we want to truly engage a community and have a real sampling of voice, not just those who have the luxury of being able to participate, or I shouldn't say luxury, but those who find a way to sit in on to be a part of some of these structures.
I think one of the things, too, that the Chancellor has really pushed since taking leadership is on authentic engagement with communities. So we can all give examples of like really successful like mergers or rezonings. I also have examples of like I went to the community, said, here's an idea, and the community, the SLTs were like, we don't like that idea. And it was like, all right, so now we're going to take your feedback, go back, and we're going to rethink like what is a different way to approach this? Because engagement is not just me saying, here's the thing that I want to happen, and I'm going to keep telling you how it's going to happen. Engagement is really about listening and how I'm showing up to really hear what are the real needs and taking that feedback in authentic ways.
You have a follow-up?
I think I'm the only the superintendent that actually lives and has kids in his own schools. So my authentic engagement looks like waking up every day and walking out. And I'm at the playgrounds, I'm talking to parents all the time because they know that I'm in the same position as they are. And that looks like hearing ideas and taking that back to the CEC and talking about that. And the things that don't work, we try not to do. And then the things that we believe in, we try to move forward.
Now that we are getting our systems in place and creating amazing schools, how do we close those achievement gaps? Because I'm looking at the data, and as you can see in my testimony, in my opening, I said we spend almost $32,000 per kid. What's the return on our investment, and how we're going to close those gaps?
Absolutely, great question. We're so happy you asked us that question. So again, we started with standardizing curriculum across the districts, but one of the things that we were not paying attention to in the initial rollout of New York City Reads and Solves are the interventions and the supplemental programs that kids sit with when Tier 1 instruction isn't enough to access the curriculum. So for those who are not educators, because I know I'm preaching to the Chair Joseph choir, when you cannot, when you are not able to access the Tier 1 instruction with the regular classroom instruction and you need additional support, sometimes students will then be pulled into small group instruction, even pulled out of a classroom for support. I can tell you that right now, this administration, we are absolutely working with schools that are piloting certain collapsing of Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction, so that intervention work actually happens in small groups within the classrooms, because we believe that students shouldn't be isolated from that Tier 1 instruction, even when we're trying to intervene. But most importantly, the types of programs that kids have access to have to be research-based, they have to be impactful, and we have to have oversight of them. So when we did initial inventory, it was something like 40-something interventions across the system. No rhyme or reason, no one's monitoring it. Sometimes you walk into a district, the superintendent has a bunch of them happening in their schools. That's really hard to have oversight. And so we said superintendents shouldn't have to do this work alone. From Central, we are actually vetting which are the intervention and supplemental systems that will be in classrooms. We know that they are reliable, so the same attention we gave to the curriculum at Tier 1, we're doing in Tier 2 and for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Why is that important? I don't want kids wasting time on programs that are not impactful, and I certainly don't want schools spending money on things that are not going to be impactful. The other aspect of it is that we now have a technological mechanism to have oversight of these interventions as well. So we see the dosage and the frequency. We see how often the kids are sitting with it and engaging with it. Is it working? How are you adjusting instruction based on these data? That's really important because we don't want to over-test kids, but we want to make sure that based on what's happening in the classroom on day-to-day instruction and these interventions and supplemental programs, that when we see these red flags, we're adjusting instruction to address them in that moment. So when you're talking about the achievement gap, it's not just about instruction and curricular resources. There's so many more pieces to this. And when we talk about instruction, how do we norm across this very, very large system on what a good instructional practice is? Again, I don't want my teachers figuring that out on their own. I don't even want my superintendents figuring that out on their own. Now, the 3 superintendents who we have here, they have excellent practices in their district. There are other superintendents that have excellent practices. So going back to Chair Williams' question, which was also a suggestion, is that we need to curate those best practices, norm across the system on what is a best practice, and then make sure that we're establishing the structures to share across the districts. But you're right, 31,000 and change is unacceptable to have these kinds of outcomes. And the sadder thing is that ours are not the worst in the nation. It gets much, much worse.
I'm sure, but we are the largest school system in the country. So therefore, when people look to us to lead, so we got to do better. That's why every time they open a sentence and say New York City is the most segregated school system in the country, it bothers me. So we got a lot of work to do, and I'm here for it along with Chair Williams. Are you with me? You wanted to add something? You like coming up here today. You didn't like coming up here. Now you do. Go ahead.
It is so not that, but it is an important question, and this is one of, it's my baby.
That keeps you up at night, right?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have really pointed out for superintendents first and foremost is helping them recognize their number. So what does that number mean? So we have a total of more than 321,311 students who are not proficient yet. And that cumulative number represents the totality of all 45 of our districts in high school, 9th and 10th graders, and in community soups, all of the students who we are measuring for proficiency. Why is that number important? My push for superintendents and partnership and under the guidance of our chancellor is this: you should know your number like you know your birthday. Because in the professional world, this number is equally as important, and recognizing that that number actually equates to a child. So for me, I have 2 children in New York City Public Schools. My son is in high school. Rowan, he is not a part of that number. But my daughter is a rising first grader who cannot yet read. She is not yet at proficiency. She is a part of that number. So I have a personal stake in making sure that the systems and structures that we roll out as a city not only impact my daughter, who has a mom who has privilege, but every child, my nieces, my cousins, and a host of the children that make up New York City Public Schools. And one of the ways that we are being super intentional, Chair, is that we are ensuring that everyone has a shared understanding about the differences that exist between intervention and supplemental support. So we want to make sure that, yes, schools maintain their autonomy. We think it's important. Every school is unique, but it can't be reckless autonomy, right? So autonomy is the cousin of accountability. So what that means is that in your selection, you need to select from a curated list that identifies interventions that are working, supplemental programs that support students, and also we recognize that there are superintendents who are doing great work around programs that have not quite been tested or proven as something that we would endorse across the city, but they're on like our watch list because they are showing a value add. Particularly, we see that the last time we came here, we spoke about Dr. Van Ness, who's doing some great work around reading intervention and recovery for high school. And that is another demographic that we have to pay attention to. So again, like we recognize that this is a big deal. We recognize that we are not there yet, but I'm always of a stance to say the things that we are doing that are great, I want to always acknowledge it, because I think that really expressing to families that we are a work in progress, but yet we are aggressively attacking it is equally important. So I'm looking forward to the start of this school year. I'm looking forward to superintendents having a deep understanding about intervention supports that improve core instruction overall. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm also a parent of a high schooler who's taking Regents today as well. And as I'm watching, I see the struggle across the city with our high school students with Algebra 2. And that's across the board. I watch data too. I'm a data nerd. I watch data. That used to drive my instruction. That also drive my policies as to where I should put my money, where would the children need intervention. And reading is one of them. And I think as we talked about NYC Reads, how we have to create partnership with parents. It should not solely rely on the teachers to do all of the work. It should be an extension in the home. And I always give the example that I knew how to tie my shoelaces before I went to school. I knew my timetables before I went to school because I had my grandparents at home who taught it. So we have to go back to making families partners in this work in order for us to succeed. And these amazing, great schools that we have out there, what's your marketing budget to let parents know about these amazing programs that sometimes all we hear is how terrible New York City Public School is, but there's some amazing programs happening. But again, Deputy Chancellor and Chancellor, no one knows about them. No one knows you have amazing college now programs. You have CTE, you have P-Tech schools. No one knows about them because they're hidden secrets inside of New York City Public Schools. So what's the plan to make sure that people know how amazing the system is? And these are the great things you're doing.
So respectfully, I think that we've made a lot of headway on shining light on the hidden gems. I definitely think, there's a lot of work to be done, but through the use of social media and being really strategic with our platforms, we have actually made sure that we are highlighting the schools that are unsung heroes. Along with that, we also highlight on the ground frontline people like our school safety agents, like our cafeteria workers. Why is that important when advertising these amazing schools? Because we want them to know that it's not only the instruction, it's the environment that you're getting. You want a village to raise your child? This is the village. And so in my PS Plus U, Nobody wants to hear from me all the time. They don't want to hear about that's not a diary entry for the whole city to read. It needs to be about me saying, hey, went to this school and met this amazing parent coordinator who's been in the system for 25 years and who started English speaking classes for parents. I can continue? Sorry.
Go ahead.
It is highlighting the programs that are coming out of our Future Ready initiative. It is highlighting the programs that are tied to CTE. It's talking about the great instruction that's happening in some of these schools. And guess what? They are in Brooklyn, they are in parts of Queens, they are in parts of the Bronx where most people say, I don't want to walk through those neighborhoods. Because we do not want the stigma attached to these schools where we know that some people say, oh, if it's in that neighborhood, it can't be a good school. We absolutely know that that's not true. So using social media, using our different platforms, we have done that work. We also have partnered with our superintendents to say, you are the best narrator of your story. Like, what is happening in your district? So I'll give you an example. Superintendent Deans in Bronx High School 8, 10, and 11. No bias here. You know, I might have been the superintendent a little bit in that district and taught and was a principal, but you know, I'm not personally invested in that district. But he came up with a brilliant idea that I didn't think of when I was in the district. He actually made a video with parents and students and teachers and principals talking about all the different programs and showcasing it. It's a very short video, but it gives a comprehensive overview of what is offered. And what's important about this example, he's got Bronx High School of Science and American Studies in his district. Guess which two schools were not featured in that video? Bronx High School of Science and American Studies, because they don't need the marketing. Right? So this is important for us to also work at the superintendent level and the school level to say, what are your hidden gems and how are you going to market them strategically? And here's the support from Central.
Thank you, Chancellor. So in 2017, New York City Public Schools released a diversity plan with 3 goals to be achieved within 5 years. Increase number of students in racially representative schools by 50,000, decrease the number of economically stratified schools by 10%, or 150 schools, increase the number of inclusive schools that serve English language learners, students with disabilities. Did New York City Public School goal of increasing the number of students in racially represented schools, did you achieve that by 2022?
No, we have not. The report, absolutely. It is something that our team continues to review. We know that we have a lot of work to do in this area. I think that we have done some really innovative things that speak broadly to these goals, but we do have a lot of work to do across these areas. There's definitely no question about it, and I hope to have the opportunity to continue making a dent in this work. First Deputy Chancellor.
So what percentage did you, what are the current racial representatives compared to 2017? What are the data there? What are we seeing?
Well, so a couple of things. One, it's, people cite the 2014, now 11-year-old UCLA study. I have serious issues with their methodology and also based on my observation of hundreds of districts around the country. New York City is not even close to being the most segregated school district in the country. Most of our students, what the data shows, most of our students attend schools that have some level of diversity. Is it enough? No. Is it all of our schools? No. But we have between 400 and 500 schools where there's no one group, ethnic, racial group, which is a majority. It means it's a very mixed school. We have about half of our schools, there's no predominant group, meaning that there's no one racial ethnic group that's more than 60%. The number of schools that are 90% Black and Hispanic is been reduced. So just to say, there's a lot of different ways to define diversity. I think the traditional way has been our Black and Hispanic students going to school with white students. We obviously have more work to do to make sure our kids are benefiting from diversity. I'm a kid who went to intentionally integrated schools way back in the Middle Ages when I went to school, and I benefited hugely from that. We got to look at the math. Only 15–16% of our students are white. We can't have a definition of integration that says our students of color are going to school with large numbers of white students. That doesn't make sense. So we have to lean on all the different types of diversity. And again, as you've heard today, our superintendents, our principals, our FACE and so forth are doing a lot of work to try to promote diversity in our schools. We have hundreds of schools that have specific diversity targets. That number has increased significantly since they did that report in 2017. So we are seeing some progress, but I also think we have to give credit, in spite of the residential segregation that exists, in spite of the socioeconomic segregation that exists in our city. Most of our kids are attending schools with people who don't look like them, don't have the same background, and many don't have the same economic circumstances. So that's a good thing. That is a good thing. It's something to build on.
While there's certain district in the city, when you go in, it's only represented by one group. So that's still happening. I'm still seeing it in real time, and anybody knows I go and visit schools. I visited a school, and it's in an area that the students in the area don't go to that school. It's a lot of outsiders that come to that building, and even the educators are not representative of the students. And even though there's 1,300 students, there's only about 150 students of color that got into that school. So when we talk about doing the work, there's so much more to do in terms of making sure we're meeting that moment. And making sure our students have all access to quality education. So no one can tell me secondhand what's happening, because I'm seeing it in real time, because I'm in school buildings as much as I can. Has New York City Public School achieved the goal of reducing economically stratified schools by 10%, or how is that accomplished? How is that looking in terms of economics?
No, we haven't achieved that goal.
What percentage now? Nothing?
I don't know that we have that number. We'll have to look at that and get it to you.
All right. You'll get back to me on that number?
Yes, Chair.
I think Chair Williams have a follow-up for you.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on, there has been a lot of discussion around like community engagement, whether it's zoning, what school districts want, whether it's screening. But it does seem to focus on like traditional, more instructional, I guess like models of how we manage our schools. And I'm just wondering, like, outside of like schools that are designated like community schools, are you also thinking about tailoring other services that go beyond, what a traditional school building can do? Because I think a lot of times it's not just, like, you can give one child the same instruction as another child, and one child will just inherently succeed over the other child. So I just always think there's other conditions that impact student success, and it's not just, as has been stated, being in a good school or getting the same type of instruction. I think certain students require other types of support. So I'm just wondering, like, in this assessment, because I think we've largely been talking about screenings and curriculum and overall resources to a school, but beyond that, I mean, I did hear laundromats, but, are there any other things that you're doing or taking into consideration around what a particular school or school district needs to have successful student outcomes beyond traditional methods?
If I understand your question correctly, because you started with community schools.
I know, because I thought about, like, community schools is the only model where they are looking at these other aspects that impact whether or not a student can be successful. But even outside of, like, schools that have been designated community schools, what else are you doing as it pertains to, like, the topic, right? Like diversity, access, opportunities. Are you going beyond just looking at curriculum? And whether or not a school is getting the same amount of money as another school? Are there other things that you're looking at?
100%. So first of all, one of the reasons why we made sure that the community school expansion that was built on temporary dollars remained in place is because we do believe in the community school model. So I want to lead with that. But understanding that that takes a lot of funding and readiness, and not every school, although I would love for every school to be a community school model, right now that's not something we can immediately do. We do look at the aspects of success from the community school model and what is scalable. So as Chair Joseph knows, we have an Office of Foster Care now, right? We weren't paying attention to our foster care students the way that we should. Working in close partnership with ACS, that's really important because we need to be able to educate our families and support them. The other thing is our incredible work with the Students in Temporary Housing Office. We know that students who are in temporary housing, the obstacles that they face can absolutely impact things like attendance, engagement, and not because they are any less capable, but because they are facing some very, very real challenges. So we do have a holistic approach when we do these needs assessments with schools and figure out how we need to further support them. That also comes in the form of after that assessment, figuring out which community-based organizations can be paired with them to support them. And this is why I think it's important that superintendents are part of the conversation around budget with principals, because by holding schools harmless again this year, we know that we are in some really difficult times, and we want to make sure that all the available funding is going to schools, even if they are facing enrollment issues, so that way they can continue with some of these programming models. But there are times when we need to step in and say, you know what, this particular school needs support at the leadership level, they need additional coaching, they need additional support from a CBO to help with attendance, to help with gang violence, to help with engagement. There are so many other factors, and so we are doing that work. Many of our superintendents do it on their own, but we are taking a more centralized approach through New York City Public Schools Cares.
Yeah, like I'm thinking, even principals, I think, do things on their own outside of the superintendents. I'm thinking of one principal who they provide school uniforms because some of the children can't afford the school uniforms. They have a food pantry, but it's, again, individualized by way of this particular school, this principal who's going above and beyond to meet the needs of their students so that they can be successful. But again, just wondering, from your level and sort of institutionalizing approaches to really support students in a myriad of ways, not just school curriculum and whether or not it's, rigorous enough, or, you have a CTE program, all the things that we talked about that make a school a great school, I think has been focused on like curriculum and
Yeah, and this is why we launched NYCPS Cares, because we wanted a holistic approach system-wide to support schools. And so it's multi-phased. First phase was around anti-bullying, anti-vaping, and the family connectors. And the family connectors piece is also super helpful because we need to build capacity in our parents so that way they know the resources that are available to them across New York City. And so that we have, the last time I checked the data, we had over 1,000, Christina, keep me honest? We have 1,800 right now parents, and we just launched this, 1,800 parents who have signed up and who are going through the trainings. They're figuring out what are the resources, they're learning about the resources available with the sister agencies like ACS across the system, right? And so that's an important component. And then making sure that they're placed in different parts of the community so that way they can share these resources with other parents. Councilmember Brewer, if she were here, you'd hear her talk about the washers and dryers. Kevin Moran has really worked closely with schools and superintendents where we know that that's a need, and we have made sure that those washers and dryers are in place for the community to use. Another thing is our extended day program and the fact that we make permits available to extend hours in the day to the students, because we know schools are safe places and a lot of kids want to stay in school. They want to stay in school and they want to have fun with their friends, and so making those available throughout that initiative was also super helpful.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that is I haven't looked at the UCLA study, so I will take your word for it that their methodology might not be adequate to really assess the complexity of New York City, but I think what we see anecdotally, because I think you have more of the actual data, but what we see anecdotally is that schools that are in white and or affluent neighborhoods tend to have better student outcomes. And so if you are saying that a lot of these schools, maybe not all, technically kind of get the same similar things, but the data doesn't show sort of that by way of student outcomes, and it poses this question, right? Like, what is actually happening between various school districts and school communities? And just a quick question about what you said around the fact that most students are in schools that are diverse. Are you seeing that in the lower grades? Because I know myself, pretty much K to 8, I was in like black schools. High school was different, but K to 8, the schools were majority black. So just wondering, like, the numbers that you're talking about, is it more skewed for upper level grades, or are you seeing it, you know, in the lower level grades? So, and maybe it's because parents just want to, again, just walk their kids to school. I know K to 8, I pretty much was in district, but high school, you know, I was off on my own into another school district.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, you know, we do see, yes, because more of our elementary schools tend to be zoned. So right, they pick up whatever the residential, you know, demographics are, and we certainly see a lot of segregation. So you do see more of it. And not to say that we don't. I don't want to leave a false impression that I think that all of our schools are total rainbows and they have huge. I'm just saying. Just want to put the fact out there that there is some level of diversity in most of our schools. So like 20% of our schools, the number I would give you, and there's probably more elementary schools. I would go back and check, but excuse me, Chair, you're probably right about this, more elementary schools within this. About 20% of our schools have one of the racial ethnic groups that is 75% or more. So that's, you know, that's 20%. That's not a tiny number by any stretch, and there's probably more elementary schools. But it, you know, it does mean that in most of our schools there's not a dominating group, and so there is some contact, which is a good thing, with people who don't come from the same, students who don't come from the same background.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also highlight Read Alliance. I funded them to just try to support whatever I can do to help the reading outcomes for children in D29. I think it's a good program. And what I liked about the program is that they incorporate a local high school to go into the school and help, you know, K to 3rd grade with reading proficiency. And so I've heard good things. So I don't know if it's one of the programs that you've looked at, but I have heard good things. And they go after school. So it's also an opportunity for the children to say extended day at their home school. But I did hear good things about the program.
Thank you so much. We will definitely, I've definitely heard of it myself, but we will touch base with D29 and take a look at how it's been rolled out in that district.
It's at 176, and the high school that they worked with, I believe, was Hart, which is in the campus magnet school.
Okay, great. I do want to go back to something that you said earlier, Chair, about the outcomes piece, and couldn't agree more. There are a number of factors for our most challenged districts. A lot of it is sometimes teacher retention, right? If you have a revolving door of teachers, it's very hard to maintain that instructional sustainability. It gets difficult, which is why we've learned from that, and we are incentivizing to put teachers who are deeply committed in those districts. That's one factor. Another one is that we actually weren't giving them the same thing, right? This is only the 2nd year that we've been giving them the same thing. Before, we weren't standardizing curriculum and instruction. I know we've talked a lot about that today, but that is an important point to make. When we're talking about equity, we have to make sure that those resources are going into the schools that they need, along with the coaching. The other piece is we cannot ignore poverty, right? We don't have an achievement gap. We have an opportunity gap. And so how are we making sure that we're giving kids what they need when it comes to clean clothes, when it comes to access to programs and initiatives that are going to motivate them to want to persevere despite their challenges? And then how are we making parents partners? If I'm walking into a school building as a parent and I don't feel like I'm welcome, I feel like I'm being judged, then I'm not not going to want to be your partner. And something as simple, I'll end with this, on how we approach attendance, right? This has been a really challenging year for all the reasons that we don't even have to list because we know them. And yet our attendance, you know, even with some fluctuations, we're still holding right now overall year attendance at 90%. And I think that speaks a lot about the efforts. But one of the things we did was adjust our language. We weren't sending out letters that say, send your kids to school, you're not sending your kids to school. We've changed that language to say, hey, we noticed your child isn't in school. We know these are some of the barriers and we're addressing them. What can we do to help you get your kid to school? Because we know that sometimes a grandma who is taking care of a child in a 5-story walk-up and it's 100 degrees outside, they might not be able to come downstairs and then go back upstairs. But you know what? We have walking school buses in some of the districts. We have partnerships with CBOs who are supporting. We have dedicated teachers. Again, going back to pulling those best practices together and figuring out how we can standardize them in our most challenged districts. So this work is far from done, but I'm glad that what you essentially did was lay out a framework for how we should be thinking about schools holistically, because it's not just academic achievement, but academic outcomes really are a reflection of the need to double down on all these areas.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you. Those are the social safety nets we talk about impacting our students in NYCHA, when there's no water, when there's no elevator, and it's a grandparent that's taking care of them, can't go up and down the stairs. I know communities where they send folks to go pick up the kids. So these are the things that we're facing. So we know that it's not just academic. Those social safety nets need to continue to be in place, whether it's community schools, pantries, partnering with ACS to have pantries, and meeting parents before they get involved with ACS cases. This is something we did this year with the council along with ACS. So there's a lot of work that's being done. So New York City Public Schools stated that removals of screens during COVID increased the percentage of admissions offered to lower income students to 48% and L students to 7%. How has that number changed since the screens were reinstated in 2022?
So every Screen High School, we reserve seats that reflect our borough level demographics for students with disabilities, as well as our multilingual learners. For fall 2025, 14% of offers went to students with disabilities and 5% to English language learners, closely aligning with our borough benchmarks. But also just to note that, I said this before, one of the things that we take pride in is how we also communicate to families these options in terms of extra seats that we set aside for students with disabilities, and that is in my schools.
And our students with multi-language learners, I noticed there was a drop in the numbers. What you said it was 5%?
5%. All of those numbers are steady.
Okay. In 2019, the student advisory, the School Diversity Advisory Group issued 100 recommendations, how many of which were adopted? Still live in New York City Public School website. What has New York City Public Schools done to evaluate the progress on these adopted recommendations? Are you able to provide update to the council on the progress of each of those adopted recommendations, and by when?
Chair, I'm sorry. I think it's a coffee time for me. I'm going to need you to if you could please kindly repeat that.
Oh, sure.
So, Chair, I think fair to say, I know that happened in 2019, and the Chancellor will jump in as well. But I'm the one with the reading glasses, so I got a
I lost the contact lens, Chair. I can't read.
You'll read. This is the read aloud part.
It's a read aloud. So, you know, and then COVID happened. We're certainly aware of those recommendations. The big recommendation was around equity, and so this is something, as you've heard, job one that the Chancellor has laid out is making sure that all of our kids are strong readers, which has affected our marginalized communities more than others. On the specific recommendations, we are looking at them to see which ones are still relevant and dovetail with the Chancellor's priorities. So we'll be happy to meet with you to talk about that.
There was a report that came out. that said that this administration has set the school system back.
In terms of, we would take issue with that. Or if anything, our system is more diverse. One of the things, I'll give you an example. Our screened high schools, where I think we did a good job of kind of harmonizing, we were hearing from different groups of parents who in some cases had diametrically opposed opinions. They should use test scores with rank ordering of kids 1 to 10,000. Other people said no screens ever, anywhere at all. If you looked at our screen, the demographics of our screened high schools, some of them are the hidden gems, Chair, I think you're talking about. 2/3 of them come from economically disadvantaged households. Majority are Black and Hispanic students. You know, the percentage of demographics, white, Asian, Hispanic, are relatively close to what it is overall. So, and again, we're not forcing anybody to go to those schools. These are screened high schools that our parents are choosing. We try to make that process under Travana's leadership more and more transparent. So we think we're actually making quite a bit of progress. The other thing, you may have some questions about this. We put out some social media on this recently. AP tests, advanced placement, which we hear a lot from our students and our parents wanting access there. Not only this past year do we have more students than ever in history taking the exams. This was something we were really excited, Chancellor was really excited about this. We have more students, including double-digit gains of Black and Hispanic students, passing, meaning they get college credit, meaning they don't have to pay tuition on that. So we think we're making a lot of progress that certainly, if you look at the spirit of the recommendations in the report, is aligned to that. The specific recommendations post-COVID, some of them are more relevant than others, and we're certainly analyzing that.
So I'm just going to ask a few more, and then what we'll do is we're going to follow up with you. How many
Yes,
district
Chair.
diversity working groups have been formally established to this date?
You have that one, Travana? What's that? I'm not aware that we have groups. I think, you know, superintendents certainly have working groups around diversity, but we haven't tracked that as yet. We would have to look into it. We certainly have, yes, we certainly have employee resource groups. Well,
So I'm going to ask a few questions around Intro 955. What is the status of the compliance of Local Law 225 in establishing a diversity working group in each community school?
We have not complied with that, Chair.
Do you plan on it?
It is something we are looking at, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions around Intro 955. How many after-school programs are currently offered across DOE schools, buildings, included those operated by DOE, DYCD, and external partners?
We have Dr. Melendez joining us.
Hello. High schools, correct? High schools and middle schools, or everybody?
After schools across the city, where the question is not in any particular, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school, it's how many after-school programs across the DOE schools, buildings, DOE, DYCD, and external providers.
So we have, I'm going to go with seats. Those are the numbers I have, and I can break those down. I can also get back to you with the programs themselves, but 131,948 seats across various programs, DYCDs, CBOs, et cetera.
How many students are currently enrolled across these programs?
We have the 131,000 seats. I don't have the actual numbers of the, never mind. 490 in our elementary schools, 247 programs in our middle schools, and then 204 in our middle schools.
How many seats, how many total seats are available, and what's the percentage of those seats that are currently filled?
Yeah, I haven't done the math on that, Chair, but that's the 131,000.
You can ask her. How does New York City Public School coordinate with Department of Youth and Community, DYCD, to collect shared data on after-school programs, such as location, seat availability, enrollment, and attendance?
We do our very best to work in partnership with them, particularly now in their expansion and thoughts. We've been very strong collaborators in that work. Even the 40 schools that they are starting with, we had we were strongly connected in the conversations and thinking about their selections.
Okay, so this question we'll be able to answer it as well then. All right, so this part of the question, I'm gonna send it in writing, and I need it to be answered. I'm gonna talk about class size. How does New York City Public School ensure that implementation of class size law does not exacerbate existing patterns of social or economic segregation?
Well, our initial concern with the class size law was precisely that, which is why, and Yael, I know you'll jump in, but I just want to initially say that that's why our process on asking principals to submit proposals on how to solve their issues specific to their schools was really important. That gave us an opportunity to work with UFT and CSA and make sure that all schools that were facing this issue were given resources equitably. And so very, very proud of that work, because that is where we're going to see an increase in the number of teachers, some office spaces or other spaces being converted back to classrooms. Those are all ways that we are going to make sure we are complying with class size law while still making sure that we're paying attention to the equity piece.
And in the in the draft class size reduction plan, does it address how equity, diversity, and integration will factor into implementing this law?
Yes, I think one thing to add to the Chancellor's response to your last question is just that in the plans that schools submitted, they had to demonstrate that they would do this without reducing enrollment and without eliminating any of the programs we talked about today, like dual language programs like NEST or D75 inclusion. So that's been a critical part of the process. And at this stage, enrollment reductions are not a part of the process that we're up to at this point. In the draft class size reduction plan, we do demonstrate that what we're seeing right now in our compliance data is that our schools with higher economic need are already in higher compliance. And as the Chancellor said, we're going to continue to work across the board and with our union partners to continue to prioritize those schools in ensuring that they are able to maintain and grow those compliance rates. And
one thing I would say, Chair, the good news I would say is if a school has, and hundreds of our schools do, have a diversity in admissions program, there's no reason, and we wouldn't accept it if they wanted to change that as a result of class size. They should be able to continue that program unimpeded with smaller classes. And as Yael says, they're not reducing the overall number of students, so that wouldn't be a reason to stop recruiting a more diverse student body. So hopefully we will not see that sort of interruption of diversity efforts. Obviously, we have concerns, as Yael is pointing out, that there is a correlation between fewer classes being in compliance and higher income levels in the surrounding areas. So that that is something we're looking at. The law doesn't give a lot of discretion in how it is implemented. In 5 years, we have to get to 100%, and we're obviously committed to complying with the law.
For Councilmember Narcisse left, she left me a couple of questions to ask, so this will be my last set of questions. What targeted strategies is the DOE using to recruit more teachers in our public school system? I think we talked about that. And how is the New York City Public School addressing mental health needs of immigrant students, particularly those who have experienced trauma, housing instability, or discrimination, or where stigma around seeking help is still exists within our communities?
So I know we talked a lot about the first one. So if I could just go directly to the second one, Chair, I appreciate you. We have expanded mental health clinics, which is very important to us. We also, thanks to thanks to all of you here at City Council, we have been able to ensure that every single school has access to a social worker, a school counselor, things that unfortunately were luxuries. And when we're speaking about equity, we know that those are not luxuries, they're necessities. The other thing is I also want to continue to uplift and repeat the outstanding work that Mark Rampersant does. You know, we talk a lot about the work that he does in the physical safety realm, but we don't talk enough about the mental health space. And he and his team, universities, to strategically partner schools with social work interns who really are invested in the communities. And so mental health is very important to us, and we are making sure that that those things continue and they expand. The other piece of it is, as part of New York City Public Schools Cares, we have some announcements on the horizon specific to mental health supports, and happy to brief you before those announcements.
Chair, if I could just very briefly respond, build on Mark Rampersant's answer to Councilmember Marmorato in her bill. We first of all, very sorry for the loss of your grandfather. And second, that sounds like a terrible event, so we extend our condolences there. Our understanding, while we're always looking for new technology, we appreciate your saying that the abdominal thrust, the Heimlich, are the primary maneuver to deal with choking. We're always on the lookout for if there are additional technologies or training that would improve our ability to save lives. We're open to that. Our understanding is that the LifeVac or similar devices are at least not yet FDA approved, so we have concerns about using them until they get that approval, but would be happy to work with you to maybe learn about other technologies, other equipment, other training that might enhance our ability to keep our kids and adults safe.
Thank you. It's always great to see you all. We'll follow up with some other questions offline, and we look forward, as always, to work with you to move the needle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Of course.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please keep your conversations down to a minimal. We have a hearing next door. Once again, please keep your conversations down. Folks, please quiet down in the chambers. Take the conversations out to the rotunda, please. Folks, please take the conversations outside. If you're going to be loud, please take the conversations outside. Thank you.
Yeah, you just told me.
So I don't think that I'm ever coming back to another education committee.
I now open the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcript of such recordings at Sergeant-at-Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak today's hearing, please fill out an appearance slip with the Sergeant-at-Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you'll have 3 minutes to speak on today's oversight topic or legislation. If you have a written testimony or additional statement you wish to submit for the record, please provide a copy of the testimony at Sergeant-at-Arms. You may also email at testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recording will not be accepted. We're going to call the first panel. Clarissa Kunizaki, if I mispronounce your name, forgive me. Kulsum Tapal. Johnny Witherspoon, Allah Salima, and Amina Mohammed. Please give me grace if I did mess up your name.
Good afternoon. Am I good to go? Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for convening us today and for a really informative session so far, and thank you for allowing us to testify. My name is Kulsum Tapal, and I'm representing the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. CACF is the nation's only Pan-Asian children and family advocacy organization. We're proud members of the Integration Coalition, a collective of advocates working to advance policies that combat school segregation and promote equitable education for all. New York City remains one of the most segregated school systems in the country. This segregation directly harms AAPI students and families, particularly those from low-income immigrant and English language learner backgrounds. At a time when anti-immigrant, anti-DEI rhetoric is rising nationwide, it's more critical than ever to ensure that our public schools are places of inclusion, access, and opportunity for all students. To advance school integration and ensure equitable education for all, CACF recommends that the New York City Department of Education and city leadership take the following actions. We first ask that New York City is fully funding our public schools by baselining funding for key educational programming like immigrant family outreach, restorative justice, and early childhood education outreach, to name a few programs. These are all essential to support integration efforts. Without programs like these, many AAPI students would lose critical support systems that enable them to thrive academically and socially and integrate properly in their school communities. Second, we call for the passing of Intro 1134 in City Council and to collect and publicly report disaggregated data by ethnicity, language proficiency, and income level to better understand and address disparities in the educational access and outcomes for AAPI students and other marginalized communities. 3, maintain and build upon existing reforms that eliminate discriminatory admissions criteria while increasing transparency and public oversight of the admissions process to ensure fair access to all schools. 4, implement class size mandates with integration in mind, with school communities in mind, and with their collaboration of school communities. 5, ensure a CRSC curriculum is taught, a culturally responsive education is taught in every school to ensure further integration and to ensure that a school environment that promotes integration is created. 6, strengthen language access services by expanding interpretation and translation services for immigrant and ELL families, ensuring they're included in decision-making processes regarding school policies and integration efforts. And 7, develop meaningful. Thank you. We have our ASAP right here, and I'm going to introduce.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. I want to specifically thank Chair Joseph and the rest of the council for having me here today. So my name is Clarisse Kanazaki. I'm a junior at Brooklyn Technical High School in Brooklyn and a youth advocate at the Asian American Student Advocacy Project, ASAP. ASAP is CACF's citywide youth leadership program. So before 9th grade, I attended predominantly white schools. As someone of mixed Japanese, Ecuadorian, and Irish descent, I often felt out of place in these spaces. For instance, my Asian and Latino family members were often asked if they were the nanny by other parents during pickups, and I thought that going to high school, my high school, which had a greater presence of API students, that this would free me from a lot of the racialized microaggressions and inner conflict that I witnessed before, but I was wrong. Last fall, my school was on a hold where students had to stay in their classrooms until it was lifted. Immediately, rumors that blamed a Latino 9th grader for allegedly assaulting a teacher were circulated in group chats of both parents and students. But because there are so few Latino students at my schools, many didn't question or realize the harm that this false profiling caused. And situations like this are deeply alarming realities that are perpetuated by the lack of Black and Latino students at my school. In terms of my coursework, this year I opted to take sociology. There are far fewer API students in my classes like this compared to those in my STEM classes, where we're pushed to choose because of the model minority stereotype and conditioned by society to remain quiet, submissive, and STEM-oriented. While sociology, AP English language, and my other humanities classes have been my most formative in my K-12 education, it deeply saddens me that discussions pertaining to race and oppression are often not enriched by students of color from all backgrounds who are directly impacted by these issues. The lack of students of color in these conversations is its own injustice, and these missing perspectives are manufactured. Even in a school where there are many API students, there's still a lack of understanding of our histories that are diverse, and the harm of segregation isn't isolated. It fuels anti-Asian, anti-Black, and xenophobic attitudes among all. A lot of this hate comes from not knowing each other, and when students don't form real connections, they don't care to learn and aren't given the opportunity to do so in the first place. Misunderstandings and stereotypes fueled by residential segregation are so often exacerbated by school segregation. New York City public schools fail us when they don't create spaces where all students are given equitable opportunities to thrive. And creating these spaces is not enough. They need to be actively nurtured to sustain positive impacts, including fair funding, implementation of inclusive AA and HPI curricula, professional development, and the hiring of diverse staff. I would not be in the position I am here today without the guidance of my teachers and peers of color that I see myself in, particularly in humanities subjects. But the truth is, I shouldn't have to go out of my way to search for these connections on my own time. There must be active support from legislators to ensure our students are able to learn in a diverse, integrated, and fully funded school environment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Joseph, and the members of the Committee on Education for giving me the chance to speak to you all today. My name is Alia Solomon, and I'm a junior at the Bronx High School of Science. I'm here today to speak not against this Discovery program, but against the way that we abandon students after its 3 to 5 week window. This program was created to provide access and opportunity to students who show promise but have not had the same resources as their peers. But once those few weeks are over, they're dropped into a high-pressure school environment with little to no sustained support, and while the intention may be equity, the result is often harm. These students are left behind to fend for themselves in schools that, frankly, do not have the infrastructure to provide the academic, emotional, or cultural support that they need. These students are left to navigate schools that are still shaped by that deep-rooted segregation, and they're placed in environments that weren't built to support their emotional, cultural, or academic needs because those supports were never designed for students from underserved backgrounds. Meanwhile, their peers, often from wealthier and better resourced middle schools, continue to excel, not because they're more capable, but because the system has always worked in their favor. At Bronx Science, I've watched as the Discovery Program students are often quietly labeled and treated as less than, seen as having received a handout. They're isolated, judged, and told in 100 subtle ways that they do not belong. And the data reflects what students don't already know. Many Discovery students struggle to keep pace with peers from more affluent middle schools, such as Booker T. Washington. And that's not a failure of the students, it's a failure of the system. So I want to propose an extension of the Discovery program. It's not just a summer boot camp, but it's a full year program that it is embedded within the specialized high school system. It provides stipends, incentives for students to attend weekly meetings, mentorship circles, and academic support sessions for the entirety of their freshman year, giving them a seat at the table and not just a foot in the door. Over time, this extension would close that achievement gap, build confidence, and create that pipeline of diverse, empowered students who feel like they truly belong and are equipped to lead. If the DOE truly believes in equity, it needs to move beyond the quotas and percentages that we all heard today and commit to a real investment in student success. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Joseph, members of the Committee on Education, and members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Emina. I'm a New York City public high school student. I'm here today as an activist with the Center for Anti-Violence Education, but most of all, I'm here as an advocate for my community. I've decided to put forth all my efforts to stand up for them. I'm very grateful to go to a school that's pretty diverse and does a great job at bringing resources to its students from different backgrounds. But in my position as a youth community organizer and a high school student who has friends that go to other high schools, I'm very well aware that not all schools are like this. My friends have to walk through metal detectors in the morning and have their bags checked every day. Their guidance counselor doesn't have enough time in the day to get to them amidst the other 300 students they're responsible for. My friends in areas with large Black populations are at disproportionate risk of ending up on an unethical gang database. Every person from my community that goes to a specialized high school struggles in some way or another because their specific needs as people of color are not being met. My friend Azrin isn't allowed to pray at school. Eid holiday was misscheduled by the DOE, and my friend Hannah still couldn't miss school on Eid day because she had an important test. The thing that makes my school and community organization work so well is the implementation of restorative justice practices. I'm in spaces that prioritize me. Now, the Citywide Council for High School Students, or CCHS, is passing a resolution to halt all funding to restorative justice. They want to suspend restorative justice in schools so they can go back to suspending our students. It scares me to read the news about a right-wing power grab on my education. I don't want to lose my privileges and resources. But while I have them, I will use them to fight for my friends and family. It's unfair that the location or majority demographic of your school dictates how much resources you have access to. This is segregation. I want you to listen to the experts on this and those most affected by it. The restorative justice specialists, the guidance counselors, and most importantly, the students. We want to go to school knowing that we will be listened to by our educators. We don't want out-of-touch employees to make decisions about our education without taking us into consideration. Protect the funding that prioritizes me and my friends. I have copies of my testimony if you would like them.
Sure. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Chair Rita Joseph and the City Council for your ongoing support on arts education. I'm usually advocating on behalf of restorative justice, but I'm taking a little bit of a different lens. And I'm here to advocate on behalf of arts education. And I urge the city to fully fund the arts and build a public school system where students feel seen and are able to creatively express themselves. My name is Janiyah Witherspoon. I'm a social worker and the co-founder of the Circle Keepers, a Brooklyn-based nonprofit that trains youth as restorative justice practitioners and socially conscious organizers. And we use culture and educational organizing to heal the harms of racial segregation in schools, and harms that we hear today that are deeply rooted in both history and the present. I saw this firsthand. I'm a proud graduate of Harvest Collegiate High School, a school that valued restorative circles and creative expression. It changed my life. But even in that space, I noticed how students of color were underrepresented, even in advanced classrooms, and how access to the arts varied dramatically depending on what neighborhood you came from. As a young Black girl in mostly white learning environments, I had to learn how to advocate for myself and for others, and that experience definitely shaped everything I do now. Today, I work with youth, navigating the same inequities I faced, and in some ways, it's worse. Many of our partner schools don't have single full-time certified art teachers. Programs are delayed, underfunded, or are treated as optional. And when young people are struggling with trauma, poverty, racism, these creative spaces are not just enrichment, they're survival. One student I mentored some days back nearly dropped out due to her chronic anxiety. But yet, due to her arts program, she was able to find her voice again through her storytelling and poetry circles. Today, she leads circles in her own school, and that's the power of arts education rooted in healing and justice. But right now, that power is at risk. The loss of 14.8% of certified art teachers, compounded by expiring federal funds and looming budget cuts, threatens to erase the very programs that help students to stay connected to schools and to themselves. Arts education should not be a privilege, it should be a right, and a promise we keep to every young person in the city. And thank you for your time and your commitment.
Thank you, and just for the record, this council fights hard for arts education, and it is in the budget this year as a part of our response, and it's in there. And schools who do not have certified art teachers get a grant to make sure they have arts in the building. So we outside doing the work. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you for your young voices, always being advocates. We are proud of you. Keep walking into spaces and keep raising your voices. Thank you. The next panel, Laura Lay, Nyla Berg, Rochelle DJ, Randy Levine, Matt Gonzalez, and Matt, I took off my glasses, Chaco. I took off my glasses, forgive me.
You may begin.
I was going to say good afternoon, but good evening, Chair Joseph, Chair Williams, and members of the City Council Education and Civil and Human Rights Committees. My name is Laura Lai, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst and Strategic Organizer for Education in the Office of New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today at this important hearing. Comptroller Lander has a very deep record of commitment to racial diversity and equity in New York City public schools. But today I'm here to discuss another form of persistent exclusion and segregation that many New York City students face. Students with disabilities make up 22% of all New York City public school students, yet continue to face multiple barriers to full inclusion, full equity with their peers. In our office's recent report, Stranded After School, made clear children with disabilities face a disproportionate lack of access to the free after-school programs that many of their peers enjoy. This report is based on an analysis of findings from a recent Survey by our office of over 600 New York City public and charter school principals and their after-school programs. The survey found that the lack of after-school bus transportation is a major barrier to after-school care citywide, posing a particular challenge to the 62,000 students with IEP mandated bus transportation. Nearly a third of all survey respondents and 100% of District 75 respondents named the lack of school bus transportation in our survey as a barrier to student after-school participation. Another barrier identified by our survey is the way District 75 after-school programs are funded and operated, which significantly constrains their ability to meet students' after-school needs. Just 74% of District 75 schools in the survey have after-school programs, compared to 93% of schools outside District 75. District 75 programs do not have access to the primary source of supplementary after-school funding in the city, Department of Youth and Community Development Funding, DYCD. None of the District 75 respondents in our survey have DYC-funded after-school programs, compared to 49% of respondents from other schools. Most DYCD-funded and contracted community-based organizations cannot meet the specialized needs of students in District 75, leaving these programs to rely more heavily on funding from DOE Central and staffing after-school programs with their own teachers and paras who are paid per session. There are also inequities in City Council CASA grant allocations. Only 6% of District 75 schools in our survey benefit from CASA grants, compared to 15% of other respondents. In addition, fee-for-service programs are less common in District 75 than among other respondents. And I have a list of recommendations. I can read them to you, or you can look at them in the submitted comments.
Is it in your testimony? Okay.
It's in the written testimony as well.
Got it.
In particular, I just want to highlight the inequity in the CASA grant allocations, which I think is something that this City Council could potentially do something about.
Definitely look at it. Definitely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening, folks. My name is Naya Berg. I'm the Executive Director of New York Appleseed. We're a nonprofit that advocates for integrated schools and communities in New York City and state. To move something forward, I believe we must understand where we've been. So in the most succinct, rapid-fire way possible, I just want to note a few key points on the timeline. Number one, 2012, that is when the New York Times said that we are one of the most segregated school systems in the country. So if you want to not agree with the UCLA report, you can also take on the 2012 New York Times report, the IBO report, or the 2021 UCLA report, or our reports. There's also been a lot of movement from there. It provided urgency to the city so that we no longer had a shield of being one of the most diverse cities in the country, because we also called out our segregation. You had the diversity in admissions in 2013 and 2014. There were great investments by New York State and a grant program. Then grants went to districts 1, 3, 9, 13, 16. A lot of the districts that you saw speak today, they've all received investments from either the city or the state. During this portion of time between 2012 to really 2021, when there were really these rapid fire improvements, and there's a timeline in my written testimony that talks more about that. But in the wake of the pandemic and amid unprecedented challenges, a change in mayoral administration, we saw shifting priorities, and the urgency that once drove New York City's integration efforts has really faded. This slide backward is what makes this hearing so timely and important. It really, in 2012 to 2021, we saw these great strides because we are advancing goals of integration guided by this definition of the 5 R's of real integration. The full definition, once again, is in my full testimony. But again, when we said that there was no definition for integration, we have had one for some time that's also been used by New York City Public Schools and created by students. I want to also just take the time, lastly, to draw a parallel to the national moment that we're in right now. From 1954 to 1971, there was a considerable amount of momentum. This was after Brown v. Board. But if you look after 1971, there really isn't any, there's a large gap of what happened until 2012, when we restarted working on this again. And while I can't account for every detail of this gap, we must try to acknowledge that in the wake of progress, history often delivers backlash. And we must not let that win once more, not as a city, not as a school system. We cannot afford another 40-year lapse where plans are abandoned, goals are dismissed, community voices are ignored, and the right to quality education is put on hold. To that end, we offer a few recommendations for immediate next steps: to reinvest in comprehensive diversity planning, much of which was testified and brought up as success stories today, fully fund Local Law 225, and prioritize fairness, transparency,